Chapter 5:18. The last two sacred source life forms found that they could not form a contract with Lin Yuan's soul projection no matter what. However, they also seemed to be afraid of Morbius' reddish-gold luster. In the end, the two sacred source life forms clung tightly together as if they were unwilling to do so. The moment the two sacred source life forms stuck together, every part of Lin Yuan's soul projection was filled with a rainbow luster. The two rainbow-colored lusters flickered, but they did not continue to deal the final blow to Lin Yuan's soul projection, which was on the verge of shattering. Instead, the two rainbow-colored lights merged into one and fused into Lin Yuan's shattered soul projection. Finally, when the rainbow luster was about to dissipate, the sacred source life form's original appearance was faintly revealed. After Morbius lit up with the reddish-gold luster, the entire Morbius bracelet seemed to have lost its luster. Morbius' voice sounded in Lin Yuan's mind, a little weak. "Lin Yuan, I'm going to sleep for a period of time." After a pause, Morbius continued, "This time, I'm going to sleep for a longer period of time. I slept much longer than the last time. Perhaps I really won't be able to wake up before advancing to a fantasy breed. However, with the new sacred source life form formed from the two sacred source life forms, I don't have to worry about sleeping." Morbius' words were very slow, as if it was both reluctant and explaining. In the end, Morbius fell completely silent. However, after Lin Yuan's consciousness fell into darkness, he did not know anything. However, within Lin Yuan's soul projection, the sacred source life form that had just peeled off the rainbow luster and revealed its original form seemed to have received praise from a superior and seemed to be somewhat happy. The dimensional hub that had been prevented from evolving was currently experiencing violent turbulence. Without the support of source-type items, the dimensional hub's entire space became somewhat illusory as if it was faintly dissipating. The unconscious Lin Yuan, Lu Jie, and Zhou Luo were like garbage. Just as the dimensional hub was about to dissipate, they were spat out. The black-robed woman with a veil covering her face looked at the sealed dimensional rift's entrance, and her expression became increasingly solemn. However, the black-robed woman with the veil on her face suddenly discovered that the woman in the moon-colored robe beside her had a calm expression on her face. However, the coldness and madness in his aura became more and more obvious. The black-robed woman, whose face was covered by a black veil, thought, "Not good." It was as though the moon-robed woman's emotions were more difficult to deal with than the evolving dimensional rift. "Moon Empress, you came here in advance. Do you know what faction is behind this dimensional rift?" Upon hearing that, the Moon Empress stared at the dimensional rift's entrance without blinking. She didn't even look at the black-robed woman with a veil on her face. However, there was an indescribable chill in his words. "Chief Guard Yi, this consort has been living in seclusion in Leaning Moon Mountain for 10 years. Yet you're asking this Empress which faction did this? Could it be that your brain isn't working well?" The chief guard of the spirit guards, Night Leaning Moon, immediately knew that she had said the wrong thing. How could he have forgotten the Moon Empress' true temper? The Moon Empress was a self-destructing truck. Even though the Moon Empress seemed calm, that was only on the surface. The Moon Empress' killing intent was so strong that even if her disciple did not return alive, it would not diminish even if 10 continents sank to the bottom of the sea. After the Moon Empress finished speaking, she realized that she did not receive the response she should have, and her brows immediately furrowed. However, just like before, she didn't turn to look at Night Leaning Moon. Instead, she said, "Night Leaning Moon, as the chief guard of the spirit guards, you didn't even realize that Indigo Azure City had left." At this point, the Moon Empress' voice suddenly choked. Night Leaning Moon stood in place and felt that the scene in front of her was extremely familiar. 20 years ago, when she and the Moon Empress were both Radiant's envoys, it seemed that the Moon Empress was in front while she and the other 3 bastards stood behind. She and the other 3 bastards were always reprimanded like elementary school students who had done something wrong. 20 years later, the past repeated itself, except that she now had 3 bastards by her side. The Moon Empress had said that she was here to hold down the fort, but it was better to say that she was here to vent her anger and be reprimanded. What kind of human suffering was this? However, when she heard the Moon Empress' voice suddenly choked, Night-Leaning Moon, who was very familiar with the Moon Empress, suddenly raised her head. She realized that the Moon Empress' eyes were suddenly dyed with a faint red color, but Night-Leaning Moon knew that this red color definitely had nothing to do with killing intent. This was because the Moon Empress' killing intent would only appear in her aura and not on her face. On normal days, it was considered a rare thing for the Moon Empress to have an expression on her face. But now, the red color in the Moon Empress' eyes reminded Night-Leaning Moon of what the Moon Empress had said while looking at her hand during the Imperial Court Council. "I'm different from before. My heart is warm now." What did that mean? Night-Leaning Moon took 2 steps toward the Moon Empress, but she still didn't know how to comfort her. At that moment, the Moon Empress suddenly realized that the dimensional rift entrance's restriction had disappeared. The sudden disappearance of the dimensional rift's restriction stunned the Moon Empress, who would not change her expression even if a group of mountains collapsed in front of her. Immediately afterward, the dimensional rift entrance that had suddenly removed the restriction pulled out a group of objects that seemed to have drunk black tea like diarrhea. After pulling out these objects, the dimensional rift entrance dissipated. The Moon Empress immediately saw Lin Yuan lying on the ground, covered in blood, without any signs of life. In a flash, the Moon Empress arrived at Lin Yuan's side. When she saw Lin Yuan's hands, her face was immediately filled with heartache and worry. A ray of moonlight flowed out of the Moon Empress' fingers. While sensing Lin Yuan's condition, the Moon Empress' expression changed again and again. However, after the complete examination, the Moon Empress suddenly revealed a smile on her face. This smile suddenly blossomed like a flower. After this smile, the Moon Empress seemed to have let go of all her worries and sighed. "It's good that you're back, it's good that you're back." Then, the Moon Empress turned her head and looked at the pitiful rabbit that was squatting beside her leg. The Moon Empress hugged the pitiful rabbit and said, "Cece, give me your radish." When the little rabbit heard that the Moon Empress wanted its radish, it carefully handed it over. At the same time, it extended its long ears and pointed at a piece of radish skin on the radish. At the same time, it extended its long ears and pointed at a piece of radish skin on the radish. It seemed to have made a great decision but was still somewhat reluctant. After the Moon Empress took the radish, she went to Lin Yuan's side and exerted force. There was a cracking sound as the radish was directly broken from the waist. When the little rabbit in the Moon Empress' embrace heard this crisp sound, its eyes immediately turned sluggish. It was as though it had become the cry of a world-famous painting. Second chapter, Begging for Monthly Votes. End of this chapter. Chapter 5:19. After the Moon Empress broke the radish, she handed it to the suddenly lifeless rabbit in her arms. Then she placed the rabbit on the ground. The Moon Empress was at Lin Yuan's side and gently placed the half of the radish beside Lin Yuan's mouth before she started to circulate her spirit qi. With the help of the Moon Empress' spirit qi, the radish turned into liquid and flowed into Lin Yuan's stomach. After absorbing the energy from the radish, Lin Yuan's body immediately changed. A carrot-colored energy flame rose from Lin Yuan's body. Lin Yuan's body and soul had long been broken, and his spirit had fallen into a deep sleep. However, after the radish was digested, the broken human figure in the depths of Lin Yuan's soul and his arms, which had exposed white bones, were rapidly recovering. After this half of the radish entered Lin Yuan's body, it only took a blink of an eye for his body to return to normal. However, Lin Yuan's soul and spirit were still in a deep sleep. It was like a person who had stayed up for 3 days and 3 nights and needed a long sleep to replenish their spirit. Although Lin Yuan's body had completely recovered, the broken moon-white spirit qi clothes and the blood on them reminded Lin Yuan of how tragic everything he had experienced in the dimensional rift. The little rabbit also came back to her senses. Her lively eyes looked at Lin Yuan and seemed to heave a sigh of relief when she saw that Lin Yuan was fine. However, when she lowered her head and saw that there was only half a radish left in her hand, her ears drooped to the ground. The little rabbit rubbed the radish with heartache. Suddenly, the Moon Empress had broken off the radish and turned it into a whole radish. However, the newly grown radish looked 1 size smaller than before. The little rabbit subconsciously wanted to continue nibbling on the radish, but after seeing the smaller radish, she could not bear to eat it. Instead, she hid the radish behind her butt. Night Leaning Moon's eyes were on the other two people who had been spat out by the dimensional rift. After sizing up Zhou Luo and Lu Jie, Night Leaning Moon shifted her gaze to Lu Jie. If Lu Jie was just a Radiance 100 sequence member, as the chief guard of the spirit guards, Night Leaning Moon would not have such a deep impression of him. However, Night Leaning Moon was able to recognize Lu Jie with just a glance. Lu Jie was actually coming out of the evolving dimensional rift. Night Leaning Moon couldn't help but recall the time when Lu Jie had single-handedly blocked the swarm of insects outside of Cold Frost City, delaying the spirit guards for a full half an hour. Night Leaning Moon walked to Lu Jie's side and extended her hand to check his condition. She discovered that Lu Jie's current condition was abnormally good. The life energy within Lu Jie's body was in a state of excess. From time to time, Lu Jie's body would overflow with life energy. This was obviously the result of an overdose of treatment. However, when Night Leaning Moon looked at the insect queen beside Lu Jie, her eyebrows immediately twitched. She held the cocooned insect queen in her hand and muttered to herself. This insect queen actually absorbed the blade queen bee's life poison. What good fortune! However, the blade queen bee's venom in the insect queen's body is too little. It's not enough for the insect queen to mutate completely. Since that's the case, why don't I give you some good fortune? Just as Night Leaning Moon finished speaking, she was interrupted by the Moon Empress. Night Leaning Moon, this Empress has underestimated you. How can someone as stupid as you become a mid-class Class 4 Creation Master in 10 years? When Night Leaning Moon heard this, the corner of her mouth couldn't help but twitch twice behind the black gauze. How am I stupid? Back then, if I didn't have any talent as a Creation Master and was so diligent, I would at least be a pinnacle Class 4 Creation Master. I might even reach the standard of a Class 5 Creation Master. Even if my ability as a Creation Master is not at Class 5, I am still very strong. Why don't I see you praising me? When I was with you as a Radiance Envoy, I was always the team's main C position. Night Leaning Moon suddenly recalled that when she was with the Moon Empress as a Radiance Envoy, she seemed to be despised every day. Night Leaning Moon's mouth couldn't help but twitch even more. At that moment, Night Leaning Moon heard the Moon Empress speak again. The dimensional rift in this evolution is also at least Tier 5. It might even be higher. Now that the evolving dimensional rift has been stopped by the three of them, giving him a Blade Queen Bee isn't considered a good fortune. Night Leaning Moon looked at Lu Jie, who was lying on the ground, and pondered for a moment. She then said, I have not accepted a disciple for so many years. When he wakes up, if he is willing to acknowledge me as his master, I am willing to teach him with all my heart. The Moon Empress couldn't help but look a little surprised. Being accepted as a disciple by Night Leaning Moon, the chief guard of the spirit guards, was really considered a great fortune. Then the Moon Empress recalled that Lu Jie was her disciple, Lin Yuan's retainer knight. Wasn't Night Leaning Moon's wholehearted nurturing of Lu Jie the same as working for her disciple? That was really not bad. After Night Leaning Moon finished speaking, she looked at Zhou Luo and Lin Yuan, who was beside the Moon Empress, and then looked at the Moon Empress. Obviously, she had something to say. When the Moon Empress saw Night Leaning Moon's gaze, she said, Some people are destined to walk towards the mountains and seas. Some people are destined to walk towards the mountains and seas. Such people don't care about momentary glory. 3 years later will be the day to decide the 5 new Radiance Envoys. Speaking of this, a trace of reminiscence flashed in the Moon Empress' eyes. Then, the Moon Empress said softly, The enemy is in the dark while we are in the light. The enemy is in the dark while we are in the light. You can handle this matter as you see fit. After saying that, the Moon Empress bent down and carried Lin Yuan in her arms before walking out of the curtain formed by moonlight. After exiting the curtain formed by moonlight, the Moon Empress said to Mystic Moon, who was guarding outside, Mystic Moon, bring the 2 people inside to the Radiant Moon Palace and, after saying that, the Moon Empress paused and said again, Bring them back to Lin Yuan's mansion. Bring him back to Lin Yuan's manor and let him recuperate. Mystic Moon had already seen Lin Yuan in the Moon Empress' arms when she came out. Although Lin Yuan looked like he was in a state of deep sleep, just by looking at the Moon Empress emotions, he knew that Lin Yuan was not in any danger. Furthermore, before the Moon Empress came out, Lin Yuan had been sleeping. After the layer of blood on the bright moon in the sky became extremely rich, it had already disappeared. The mother of Bloodbath, Endless Summer, and Listen also saw Lin Yuan in the Moon Empress' arms. The moment they saw Lin Yuan, the trio's tense heartstrings could finally relax a little. The Moon Empress ignored the mother of Bloodbath, Endless Summer, and Listen. He carried Lin Yuan and walked outside. When he walked outside, the Moon Empress's body immediately emitted dense moonlight, covering Lin Yuan's figure. The Moon Empress looked at Lin Yuan in her arms and said softly, "Let's go home with Master." The moment the Moon Empress walked out, all the experts guarding outside lowered their heads. Even when they looked at the ground, their expressions were extremely respectful. However, just as the experts lowered their heads, they suddenly felt that the light shining on them was no longer cold. Instead, it had become warm. After a long while, the two guard envoys standing in front slowly raised their heads. Only then did he realize that the bright moon in the sky that reigned above everything had disappeared. The rising sun hung high in the sky, emitting warm light. The first update, asking for monthly votes, asking for a wave of subscriptions. End of chapter. Chapter 520. Lin Yuan fell into a deep sleep, but he seemed to have had a very, very long dream. In the dream, Lin Yuan was like a bystander watching a world. This world was originally full of vitality, and unknown flowers bloomed in the wilderness. However, at that moment, two rainbows emitting seven-colored light suddenly appeared in the sky above the world. The two rainbows stood as equals, not giving way to each other as they dyed the blue sky. The rainbow light seemed gentle, but it was unusually rebellious. The rainbow light sprinkled over the earth, and the unknown flowers that bloomed on the earth cracked and withered under the rainbow light. At that moment, a figure suddenly descended from one of the rainbows. This figure was a young girl with her eyes closed, and her body was like a phantom. The young girl wore a crown on her forehead and a long dress, with a kind of innate nobility. The moment the young girl descended from the rainbow, it was as if she had vaguely invaded the entire world and was about to become the master of the world. At that moment, the other rainbow descended with a sword without a scabbard. The sword's hilt was gorgeous and carved with all kinds of alien beast totems. The slender sword body contained a touch of sharpness that could tear through everything. The sharp sword wrapped in sharpness and attacked the young girl wearing the crown. The two were in a tight stalemate. It was precisely this stalemate that made the rainbow light even more unscrupulous, causing the already disintegrating world to be about to completely collapse. Just as the world was about to collapse, the entire world was suddenly covered by a touch of reddish-gold brilliance. This touch of reddish-gold brilliance gave Lin Yuan, who was watching from the side, an unusually familiar and warm feeling. When this touch of reddish-gold brilliance descended, the young girl and the sharp sword that had been in a stalemate suddenly seemed to become unusually fearful. This touch of reddish-gold brilliance, which Lin Yuan was familiar with and warm, was like a cow that did not drink water, oppressing the young girl wearing the crown and the sharp sword without a scabbard. In the end, the young girl wearing the crown reluctantly walked toward the sharp sword without a scabbard. The young girl opened her arms and embraced the sharp sword without a scabbard. At this moment, the two of them combined into one, forming a new whole from the original combination of two single entities. In midair of the world that was about to collapse, the young girl wearing the crown curled up her legs, and her skirt fluttered. She tightly hugged the sword with an unusually gorgeous hilt. The gorgeous patterns on the sword seemed to have become the young girl's authority. With the power of the heavenly Tao on him, he wanted to reach the heavens. At this moment, the two rainbows in the sky that were originally not giving way to each other also merged into one. The originally unruly rainbow light also became beautiful and gentle, and the rainbow light once again shone upon the world. This time, the rainbow light did not destroy the world that was on the verge of shattering. Instead, it blended perfectly into the world. As for the girl holding the sharp sword, after the rainbow light completely fused with the world, she submitted to the shattered world and became a part of it. Or rather, he was like a guardian, protecting this world that was on the verge of shattering. He watched everything that happened in this world like a bystander. At that moment, Lin Yuan seemed to suddenly smell the aroma of radishes. Then, in the world that was on the verge of shattering, the cracked and dry land was covered with endless radishes. The radishes grew, blossomed, bore seeds, grew old and rotted. Batch after batch of radishes continued to provide energy to this world that was on the verge of collapse. Slowly, the broken soil became fertile again, and unknown wildflowers bloomed all over the land. Meanwhile, the hero of this world, Radish, who had cured this world that was on the verge of shattering, had disappeared. However, this world was still filled with the aroma of carrots. Lin Yuan witnessed this strange scene in his dream. Moon Empress, you don't have to beat so many jujubes, right? Even if you calculate that young lord should wake up in a while, young lord can't eat so many jujubes. Cold Moon watched as the Moon Empress kept taking out the pits of the diamond smooth crystal thread jujubes from the date garden in the inner palace. Then, she used a pestle made of completely jade-textured osmanthus wood to continuously smash the diamond smooth crystal thread jujubes. Cold Moon felt that it was simply too exaggerated. The Moon Empress had probably plucked all the jujubes from the only 3 diamond smooth crystal thread jujubes in the Leaning Moon Mountain's date garden. Cold Moon knew that the Moon Empress was exceptionally fond of Lin Yuan. But now, it seemed that she was a little better than before. It was reasonable to say that after the lotus phase in the lotus pond reached suzerain, the multicolored light that they spewed could completely cover the entire inner palace. But now, it only covered a 5-meter range of the lotus pond. God knew how many times the lotus roots of the suzerain lotus phase had been cut by the Moon Empress. The Moon Empress was a little anxious as she peeled the jujubes in her hand. When she heard that Cold Moon still had time to talk, she quickly said, "Cold Moon, come and help this Empress grind these jujubes. Cold Moon, come and help me grind these dates. My disciple's hands were seriously injured when he came out of the dimensional rift. How can he not take nourishment? This Empress intends to make these jujubes into jujube powder. Even if this Empress disciple drinks it every day, it should be enough for 3 months." Cold Moon couldn't help but hold her forehead. How long had it been since she left the Radiant Moon Palace? Why did the Moon Empress seem to have changed? If young lord drank the diamond smooth crystal thread jujube powder every day, in less than a week, he would probably become a human-shaped blood sprinkler. He would be able to use his nosebleed to water the flowers and plants on the Leaning Moon Mountain. Moreover, didn't the Moon Empress already let young lord eat half of the Rabbit Emperor's sacred source life form? Even if young lord is a smooth crystal thread jujube, after being made into jujube cheese and jujube powder, he should be in the healthiest state. At this point, Song Yu stole a glance at the small flower pot containing the crystal soil. The listless Lord Rabbit Emperor was currently using his ears to plant the carrots in the crystal sand. Cold Moon felt that the Moon Empress' love for the young lord was simply terrifying. However, when she thought about her gains in Redbud City after leaving the Radiant Moon Palace, she couldn't help but smile faintly. When the Moon Empress saw Song Yu smile, she stopped what she was doing and looked at Song Yu suspiciously. 10 years have passed. Is there someone chasing you again? The Moon Empress suddenly recalled that Marquis Jingshi had openly expressed his love for Song Yu. Both of his legs were broken by Song Yue, and he sat in a wheelchair for 10 years without daring to get up. Although Marquis Jingshi's way of expressing his love was a little overboard, Song Yu's actions were not befitting of a woman. When Cold Moon heard the Moon Empress' words, she was stunned. Immediately after, Cold Moon knew that the Moon Empress had misunderstood her. Song Yu glanced at the room in the back of the palace and said, "Moon Empress, young lord's younger sister, Chu Si, is now my disciple." Yesterday's second update. There's a change in Button's work. Something happened, and we encountered some problems. Boo-hoo. There are 2 updates today. They are, I can't draw you with a brush, and unparalleled in the world. I'll make up for it tomorrow. Hee hee, love you guys. End of this chapter. Chapter 521. Upon hearing that, the Moon Empress was stunned, but she didn't look particularly surprised. During the week that Lin Yuan had been asleep, the Moon Empress had long seen how close Cold Moon was to Chu Si. It was just that the Moon Empress didn't expect that Cold Moon, who had always been cold, would actually take the initiative to accept a disciple. With just this thought, the Moon Empress was certain that Cold Moon had the intention of accepting a disciple. She must have seen the Moon Empress accept Lin Yuan as her disciple and learned from her. Since Song Yu was learning from her, the Moon Empress felt that she had to teach Song Yu how to be a good master. From the Moon Empress' point of view, a master that didn't pamper his disciple wasn't a good master. Song Yu, smile in front of Chu Si more often in the future. It's not good to be too serious. At this point, the Moon Empress muttered to herself for a moment before changing the topic. You've just taken Chu Si as your disciple. Why don't you find a path protector for her? That way, her safety can be guaranteed. When the Moon Empress said this, she looked very serious. After all, due to Lin Yuan's incident, the Moon Empress had been frightened for a while. Upon hearing the Moon Empress' words, Song Yu hurriedly replied, Moon Empress, I see that Chu Si is getting along well with my iced Songhuang dragon. I plan to let the iced Songhuang dragon become Chu Si's path protector. When the Moon Empress heard that, she felt that Cold Moon could finish her apprenticeship. All of a sudden, the Moon Empress looked at the little rabbit, who was lying on the table and looking pitifully at the carrot growing in the soil. The little rabbit sensed someone's gaze on her and immediately pricked up her ears in alarm. Seeing that the Moon Empress was looking at her, the little rabbit quickly turned around and stood up to block the flower pot that she had planted her carrots in. The Moon Empress helplessly shifted her gaze. This rabbit had practically fallen into the radish's eyes. At this moment, a clear voice came from the entrance of the rear hall. Moon Empress, His Highness Path Protector, the Mother of Bloodbath, requests an audience. Upon hearing that, the Moon Empress turned her head and glanced at the room in the inner palace. Let her in. After speaking, the Moon Empress placed a smooth crystal silk jujube that had just been pitted on the table. Cold Moon keenly noticed that the Moon Empress' expression had sunk. Then, Song Yu saw a red-haired, red-eyed woman dressed in red leather armor walk in from the entrance of the rear hall. When she saw the red-haired, red-eyed woman, Song Yu's entire body emitted a terrifying pressure. Under Song Yu's guidance, this terrifying pressure did not affect even the grass and trees in the rear hall. However, when this pressure fell on the Mother of Bloodbath, it felt as if it was trapped in a glacier. The Mother of Bloodbath gritted its teeth and walked toward the Moon Empress step by step, withstanding the pressure. At this moment, Song Yu's cold voice sounded. You're at the middle stage of Myth 2. You've improved quite a lot since the last time I saw you, but your wariness is too weak. The Mother of Bloodbath had been very worried for the past few days, even though it knew that Lin Yuan should be fine. However, the Mother of Bloodbath still did not know what was going on with Lin Yuan and felt uneasy. Compared to the Moon Empress, the Mother of Bloodbath might not necessarily be the most worried when Lin Yuan was suddenly swallowed into the dimensional entrance that was undergoing evolution. However, as Lin Yuan's path protector, the Mother of Bloodbath undoubtedly blamed itself the most. After seeing that Lu Jie and Zhou Luo were fine in the manor, the Mother of Bloodbath transformed into a fist-sized spider like before and landed on the roof beam. It just looked in the direction of the leaning moon mountain. Even after Lu Jie woke up and cooked, the Mother of Bloodbath did not eat a single bite. The Mother of Bloodbath looked at the Moon Empress, who had once saved it, and felt increasingly ashamed. Just as Chu Xinyue had said, it had not been by Lin Yuan's side to protect his safety. Not only had it let down Lin Yuan's trust, but it had also let down the Moon Empress' trust. Even though the Mother of Bloodbath was standing in front of the Moon Empress, it did not know how to speak. However, the Mother of Bloodbath only remained silent for 2 seconds before breaking the silence and asking softly, Moon Empress, how is Lin Yuan now? The Moon Empress was originally angry, but after seeing the Mother of Bloodbath's expression, she sighed and said, Lin Yuan is no longer in any danger. Lin Yuan is no longer in any danger. He just needs to wake up to recover completely. Based on the Moon Empress' previous temper, the mother of Bloodbath would have sublimated into nothingness under the moonlight when the Moon Empress arrived. It could be said that the mother of Bloodbath had not protected Lin Yuan because it had completely lost its vigilance. Otherwise, given the mother of Bloodbath's Myth 2 strength, it would not have let Lin Yuan be sucked into the dimensional rift that had suddenly opened. However, the Moon Empress now knew that she could not do anything to the mother of Bloodbath. When the Moon Empress had helped Lin Yuan choose his path protector, she had helped him establish a relationship. It was not like giving Lin Yuan an item like the Extreme Token. The Extreme Token had been used, and the Moon Empress could recharge it and seal it with another Moonlight domain. Even if a source-type item like the Extreme Token was damaged, the Moon Empress could spend some effort to find a replacement. Lin Yuan was the Moon Empress disciple, so she naturally understood his temperament. Lin Yuan and the mother of Bloodbath already had a deep relationship due to the bond of being a path protector. Thus, the Moon Empress, who had never sighed even in the face of difficult problems, sighed for the first time when facing the mother of Bloodbath. The Moon Empress waved her hand, and a brown stream of light flew toward the mother of Bloodbath. The mother of Bloodbath hurriedly grabbed the flying brown stream of light and found that it was an ancient wooden token with a crescent moon engraved in the center. The surface of the wooden token faintly carried a moonlight-like halo, making the crescent moon engraved on it look a little hazy. The mother of Bloodbath held the flying wooden token in puzzlement. At that moment, the mother of Bloodbath heard the Moon Empress say, "I chose you to be Lin Yuan's path protector because your exclusive skills and abilities can allow you to quickly improve your strength. That's why I valued you." Upon hearing the Moon Empress' words, the mother of Bloodbath hurriedly replied, "I have let down the Moon Empress' trust. I have let down the Moon Empress' trust." The mother of Bloodbath's words were very calm and at the same time, indescribable determination. It was as though after experiencing a mistake, the mistake itself had been engraved in its life. The Moon Empress looked straight at the mother of Bloodbath and said in a cold voice, "You have nothing to disappoint me. You have nothing to disappoint me. I only hope that you won't betray Lin Yuan's trust in the future. When you became Lin Yuan's path protector, you have already repaid the favor you owed me." When the mother of Bloodbath heard the Moon Empress' words, it suddenly recalled Lin Yuan's firm eyes in the rain when it had advanced to Myth 2. It also recalled the bits and pieces of time it had spent with Lin Yuan. First update, seeking monthly votes. Recently, I have encountered some matters and have been updating late. End of this chapter. Chapter 522. The mother of Bloodbath bowed to the Moon Empress and replied, "Moon Empress, since Lin Yuan is no longer in danger, I will return to the mansion and wait for him to return." After the mother of Bloodbath excused itself, it prepared to place the brown wooden token that the Moon Empress had just thrown over on the table in front of her. At that moment, the mother of Bloodbath heard the Moon Empress speak again. "Facing a veteran faction like the Zheng family, your strength is no longer of much use, right? A myth breed with Emperor-class combat power will ultimately be unable to become a solid shield in front of a veteran faction. However, if you can reach the Emperor-class combat power of a creation breed, then it will be a different story. This Crescent Moon Radiance token can guarantee that you will survive the creation calamity and not perish during the promotion to a creation breed. The rest is up to you." The mother of Bloodbath's hand that was holding the wooden token paused, and its expression became somewhat complicated. However, the mother of Bloodbath's expression only changed for a moment before returning to its original expression. After the mother of Bloodbath thanked the Moon Empress again, it tightly grasped the Crescent Moon Radiance token in its hand, left the Radiant Moon Palace, and returned to the mansion. After the mother of Bloodbath left, Cold Moon looked at the Moon Empress as though it was the first time she had met her. Cold Moon asked in confusion, "If the Moon Empress wants to give the mother of Bloodbath the Crescent Moon Radiance token, you can just give it to her. Why did you put in so much effort?" Cold Moon knew that the Moon Empress was never a person of many words. However, when she was giving the Crescent Moon Radiance token to the mother of Bloodbath, she actually mentioned the Zheng family, which could not be shown in public. The Moon Empress had only said one more sentence. However, this absolutely subverted Cold Moon's understanding of the Moon Empress. At that moment, the Moon Empress picked up the smooth crystal thread jujube that she had just put down and started to use the completely jade-textured osmanthus wood pestle to continuously smash the jujube. Upon hearing Cold Moon's question, the Moon Empress replied, "This little spider has very high self-esteem." If this Empress did not mention Lin Yuan and the Zheng family, even if this crescent moon radiance token could help her survive the creation calamity, she still would not accept it. At that point, the Moon Empress glanced at Cold Moon and said, "Once you become a master, you will realize that martial strength can no longer solve all problems." In this Empress's opinion, being a master is much more profound than being a Class 5 creation master. The corner of Cold Moon's mouth twitched. She did not understand why the Moon Empress said that. Cold Moon Empress. In the future, as long as Chu Ci needed something, he would give her everything he could. If he couldn't, he would create the conditions to give it to her. Empress. At this time, Xin Yu's clear voice sounded again from the back hall's entrance. "Empress, Empress, Empress." Cold Moon Empress, Empress, she of Empress, and said, "Empress, Master, Moon Chef God, she, Moon." When the Moon Empress heard this, she frowned. Moon Empress, Empress, and longer. Hasn't Chef Supreme, that old thing, been studying the breeding of spirit-savory pigs and the postpartum care of sows in Fragrant Kitchen building for the past few years? Hearing this, Xian Yu's face immediately revealed an indescribable expression. She sorted out her messy thoughts and said, "According to Chef Supreme's eldest disciple, it seems that Chef Supreme's youngest disciple has been studying how to make red braised meat tastier ever since he went back. Since Lord Chef Supreme hasn't seen his daughter for a long time, he let his little disciple and daughter stay in Fragrant Kitchen restaurant for half a month. But in this half a month, Chef Supreme's little disciple has been eyeing those spirit-savory pigs. Even the 3 old sows responsible for producing piglets were slaughtered by Chef Supreme's little disciple. In my opinion, it's not just these 3 spirit-savory pigs this year. It's possible that there will only be 3 in the future." The Moon Empress and Cold Moon remained silent for a long time before speaking in unison. "Lin Yuan is the best. Chu Ci is still the best." Mystic Moon blinked her eyes and touched the back of her head. It seemed like he was the only disciple in the Radiant Moon Palace. Why do I suddenly feel like I'm being isolated? Lin Yuan was still immersed in this strange dream. After an unknown period of time, Lin Yuan felt as though his thoughts had returned to his body. He could even faintly sense everything around him through the weak spiritual energy in his mind. For example, the soft bed under him, Morbius on his wrist, and the flowing cloud beeswax pendant on his neck. Although Lin Yuan could sense everything, he couldn't open his heavy eyelids no matter how hard he tried. However, Lin Yuan could already start to communicate with his phase in his mind. Apart from the sleeping Chimey, Genius, Red Thorn, the Source Sand, and the ethereal jellyfish that had returned to his spiritual spatial zone, they were all communicating with Lin Yuan. Especially when Genius was communicating with Lin Yuan, its childish voice had an abnormal sobbing tone. When Lin Yuan was communicating with Genius, its childish voice had an abnormal sobbing tone. After Lin Yuan comforted it for a while, Genius finally calmed down. However, Lin Yuan realized that no matter how he called out to Morbius, he couldn't get in touch with it. Lin Yuan was very familiar with Morbius' current state. At this moment, Morbius had once again entered into a deep slumber like when he had just contracted Morbius. For some reason, Lin Yuan suddenly thought of the reddish-gold light that had lit up in his dream. At that moment, an ethereal voice suddenly echoed in the depths of Lin Yuan's soul. "My lord!" After hearing this voice, Lin Yuan originally wanted to respond, but he fell into a deep sleep again in his increasingly fatigued state. When Lin Yuan woke up again, he found that he could already open his eyes. The moment Lin Yuan opened his eyes, he immediately saw Chu Ci, who was guarding by his bed. Chu Ci had obviously been sitting by the bed for an unknown period of time. Her hair looked a little messy, and her ahogue was also standing up. Moreover, Chu Ci, who had been napping, did not know what she had been dreaming about, as there were obvious tear stains at the corners of her eyes that had not dried up. Lin Yuan subconsciously reached out and wanted to help Chu Si wipe the corners of her eyes. Just as he reached out, he found that his hands had recovered to their original state. However, his mind could not help but recall the pain of countless blades blooming on his hands at that time. Those who had experienced that feeling once would never want to experience it a second time. Lin Yuan's slight movement of wiping the corners of her eyes woke Chu Si up. The moment she woke up, Chu Si did not seem to have recovered from her light dream, and there was an obvious panic on her face. However, when she saw that her brother, Lin Yuan, had woken up again, Chu Si immediately wore a bright and beautiful smile on her face. It was like a bright and beautiful spring day in April. However, as she smiled, bean-sized teardrops dripped from Chu Si's eyes and dripped on Lin Yuan's arm, still carrying Chu Si's warmth. "I'm asking for monthly votes. There will be more in a while. But it will be a little later. If everyone can't wait, then rest early." Well, end of this chapter. Chapter 523. Upon seeing Chu Si cry, Lin Yuan's heart immediately tightened. In Lin Yuan's impression, Chu Si had not cried many times since she was young. No matter how difficult things were, she would always have a smile by his side. However, now that Chu Si was crying, Lin Yuan immediately felt a little numb. This was because he really did not know how to coax her when she was crying so that she would stop crying. Just as Lin Yuan was racking his brains, Chu Si immediately threw herself into his arms and said intermittently, "Big brother, don't worry. Brother, don't worry. I'm crying tears of joy. Let me cry for a while." Lin Yuan reached out to hold Chu Si and gently patted her shoulder. Neither Lin Yuan nor Chu Si were good at expressing their feelings. Therefore, Lin Yuan's impression of such a display of true feelings seemed to be the first year he had brought Chu Si to survive. When Chu Si had almost died from her illness, there had been such a scene, but it had never happened again. As Lin Yuan gently patted Chu Si's shoulder, he sighed softly in his heart. Lin Yuan was very sensitive to Chu Si's emotions. How was this a cry of joy? It was clearly a catharsis of worry after everything was settled. Moreover, Chu Si was calling him Big Brother instead of his own name. Clearly, Chu Si knew the whole story of his injury and seemed to have been worried sick during this period. Lin Yuan thought for a long time before thinking of what to say to comfort Chu Si. He heard Chu Si bury her face on his shoulder and ask softly, "Big brother, is there anything wrong with your body now?" While speaking, Chu Si had already raised her head from Lin Yuan's shoulder and stretched out her hand to wipe away the glistening tears at the corners of her eyes. After Chu Si wiped away these tears, only a smile was left on her face, and there would no longer be big teardrops falling from the corners of her eyes. After Chu Si wiped away these tears, there was only a smile left on her face, and there would no longer be big teardrops falling from the corners of her eyes. When Lin Yuan heard Chu Si's question, he was about to speak, but he did not know how long his body had slept. His throat was dry and uncomfortable. Before he could say a word, he started coughing. Upon seeing this, Chu Si hurriedly walked to the jade porcelain tea table at the side and poured a cup of spirit tea that had been prepared in the teapot. Lin Yuan took the tea that Chu Si handed over and smiled foolishly. After drinking 2 mouthfuls of tea, Lin Yuan felt that his throat was no longer dry. "My body is very good now. I don't feel uncomfortable at all." When he had been desperately trying to stop the dimensional rift's evolution, the person he had been most worried about was his sister, Chu Si. Lin Yuan did not expect that after he woke up from his slumber he would be in a daze. The first thing he saw was his little sister, whom he had not seen for many days. Chu Si looked at the sincere expression on Lin Yuan's face, as though there was really nothing uncomfortable about it. Chu Si carefully examined him again and was relieved to see that he was in high spirits. At that moment, Chu Si's expression became a little serious. Chu Si reached out her hand and helped him tidy up the corner of his back. "Lin Yuan, I have something to tell you very seriously." Lin Yuan could not help but laugh when he heard how she addressed him. This change was too fast. He had just said that he was fine, and he had changed the way he addressed him from brother to Lin Yuan. However, since Chu Si's expression was so serious, Lin Yuan immediately became serious as well. He had grown up with her and knew her very well. He knew that she had something very important to say to him at that moment. Lin Yuan leaned against the headboard and said very seriously, "Girl, why have you become so serious all of a sudden? Why have you become so serious all of a sudden? Tell me, I'll listen carefully." Suddenly, Lin Yuan saw a trace of grievance flash in Chu Si's eyes. Then, Chu Si's eyes reddened again. Just as Lin Yuan was flustered again, Chu Si's words stunned him. "Lin Yuan, can you feel my feelings when I heard that you were sucked into the dimensional rift and your life and death were unknown? You can't understand because I have an elder brother, but you don't." This sentence, which sounded like showing off, made Lin Yuan's heart tremble fiercely. Lin Yuan was very good at putting himself in others' shoes. When facing some problems, he would try to stand in others' shoes to consider the problem. When facing some people, even if he could not accept what they did, he could understand as long as it did not violate morality. However, Lin Yuan found that he had always forgotten to put himself in the shoes of the people closest to him. All of a sudden, Lin Yuan's thoughts went back to when he was 8 years old, when it had been raining at night in the Xia region. At that time, Chu Si had a high fever, but he could not take out the money to hire a healer to treat her. In the end, it was a coincidence that Auntie Zhang had brought Uncle Li, who had just suppressed his leg, back and found out about his situation. They had hurriedly found a healer to treat Chu Si, which had allowed her to survive. At that time, the despair of being weak and the belief of relying on each other in the bitter life was about to disappear was deeply engraved in Lin Yuan's mind. Lin Yuan's eyes could not help but redden at once. The corners of Lin Yuan's mouth moved, and he wanted to say something. However, he did not say it in the end. However, in Lin Yuan's heart, he said it out softly. "I have a younger sister, but you don't. So I understand." Chu Si looked at Lin Yuan and was stunned because she found that his eyes had turned red. Chu Si immediately became flustered. However, at that moment, Chu Si had a quick wit and changed the topic. "Big brother, I comprehended another willpower rune." After saying that, Chu Si's spiritual energy shot out a willpower rune with an abnormally heavy feeling. This kind of heaviness was like a solid shield. However, behind this heaviness, there seemed to be an indomitable momentum. However, this aura was hidden behind this heavy feeling, as though only after the heavy feeling was dug out could one see the indomitable aura hidden behind it. Only then could one see the indomitable aura hidden behind it. Lin Yuan did not expect Chu Si to comprehend another willpower rune in such a short time. However, this willpower rune looked a little special, and Lin Yuan could not figure out what it represented. Lin Yuan could not help but ask, "Chu Si, under what circumstances did you comprehend this willpower rune?" Upon hearing that, Chu Si thought for a moment before answering. "I comprehended this willpower rune when I looked at the patterns on the Vajra butterfly's wings." Upon hearing Chu Si's words, Lin Yuan felt as though he had suffered a blow for the first time. Lin Yuan had always felt that his comprehension of willpower runes was already very amazing, but it was nothing compared to Chu Si's. After all, Lin Yuan had been staring at genius every day, but he had not comprehended the willpower rune because of that. However, Chu Si had comprehended this willpower rune from the Vajra butterfly. This willpower rune, which Lin Yuan could not figure out, must be suitable for the Vajra butterfly to evolve into a fantasy breed. In the room, Lin Yuan studied Chu Si's willpower rune, while Chu Si answered his questions attentively. It was as though they had completely forgotten that just a minute ago, both of their eyes had turned red. The tea in the porcelain cup was currently emitting steam, giving the room a touch of tea fragrance. A safety buckle hanging at the head of the bed bore witness to the tranquility of time under the steam. Tips and updates for not being able to draw. Thank you for your support, big brother. The previous plot was considered to be over. Lin Yuan's first sacred source life form was about to appear. Looking for monthly votes. What? Something happened to Button at work recently, so I updated late. Everyone, please forgive me. I worked hard to write once I got home. End of this chapter. Chapter 524. Lin Yuan looked at Chu Si's newly comprehended willpower rune and was a little surprised by her rapid growth. In the past 6 months, Lin Yuan had been continuously improving his strength and experiencing metamorphoses again and again. Chu Ci had relied on her talent to not fall behind. Chu Ci already had a fantasy breed obsidian iron wild bull. Now that she had comprehended another willpower rune, it was equivalent to saying that Chu Ci was about to have another fantasy breed Fey. For other spirit chi professionals who had comprehended willpower runes, the most difficult thing to promote a Fey into a fantasy breed was to improve its quality. However, with Lin Yuan around, there was no difficulty at all in promoting the Vajra butterfly's quality to legend. In other words, Chu Ci, who was only 16 years old after the new year, already had 2 fantasy breed Feys. Just thinking about this made Lin Yuan feel abnormally terrified. Chu Ci was only a first-year student in an intermediate spirit chi academy at 16 years old, but she already had 2 fantasy breed Feys. As long as Chu Ci's 2 fantasy breed Feys were promoted to silver, then Chu Ci could even have a place in the advanced spirit chi academy. Moreover, Chu Ci did not only have 2 fantasy breed Feys, but the foundations of the 2 contracted Feys were also very outstanding. Lin Yuan had always hoped that Chu Ci's combat style would not be too rash. However, he had to admit that the fantasy breed obsidian iron wild bull perfectly illustrated what offense was the best defense meant. As for the Vajra butterfly, which was about to become a fantasy breed, it was also an exceptionally outstanding defense-type Fey. At that time, Lin Yuan had picked it out of the many defense-type Feys he had picked out for her. The Vajra butterfly's defensive ability was already one of the best among bronze Feys. However, in Lin Yuan's opinion, the Vajra butterfly's true strength did not lie in its own strength. Instead, it lay in the Vajra butterfly's exceptionally outstanding evolutionary potential. If the Vajra butterfly could evolve into a jadeite butterfly, then Chu Ci's defensive ability would definitely undergo a great transformation. The Vajra butterfly's evolution into a jadeite butterfly required it to absorb a large amount of plant phase pollen. After the Vajra butterfly absorbed an excessive amount of plant phase pollen, its aura would slowly mutate through the plant phase wood attribute. During this process, the Vajra butterfly needed the assistance of pure spiritual energy to evolve into a jadeite butterfly. Among them, the decisive factor was the pollen of these plant phase that the Vajra butterfly absorbed. The Vajra butterfly was a metal elemental existence, so it would be hard for it to absorb wood elemental pollen directly. Therefore, the best way for the Vajra butterfly to evolve into the jadeite jade butterfly was to absorb the pollen of metal-wood dual attribute plant species phase. When Lin Yuan had helped Chu Ci choose the Vajra butterfly, he still had to worry about the metal-wood dual element plant Fey. Now, he did not need to worry about the pollen of metalwood type plant phase at all. Moreover, the diamond Fey storage box that Jiao Hanzhong had taken care of previously had a few metalwood dual elemental plant phase, the golden peony. The golden petals peony was a kind of ornamental Fey that bloomed all year round. The flowers that bloomed were even bigger than the mouth of a bowl and had a rich metallic luster, as though they were stacked with thin metal sheets. As an ornamental Fey, the golden petals peony didn't have any special use apart from being able to show off one's status. However, just using it to provide the Vajra butterfly with the dual attributes of metal and wood was enough. It could be said that he now had full confidence in evolving the Vajra butterfly into a jadeite butterfly. Lin Yuan pondered for a moment and asked Chu Ci very seriously. "You've been on vacation recently, so you shouldn't need the Vajra butterfly to participate in the battle." Chu Ci nodded and said, "There shouldn't be a need for the Vajra butterfly to participate in the duels before school starts. I can take advantage of the holidays to go to the Star Web to watch the duels of the Radiance 100 sequence members." Chu Ci's voice was filled with vigor. Ever since Chu Ci had been preparing to obtain more Redbud City's sequence qualifications, she had set her sights on the Radiance 100 sequence. By observing the battles of the Radiance 100 sequence members, she knew how big the gap between them was. This gap had been spurring Chu Ci on, urging her to increase her strength. Lin Yuan did not expect Chu Ci to be quite ambitious and set her sights on the Radiance 100 sequence again so quickly. However, the Radiance 100 sequence members were all very sinister, and all of them concealed their true strength tightly. Most of the strength they displayed was the strength they had displayed when they had just been selected. However, Lin Yuan did not intend to tell Chu Si about the Radiance 100 sequence's true strength now. He did not want to dampen Chu Si's enthusiasm. Lin Yuan felt that he still had to encourage Chu Si's ambition. Then leave your Vajra butterfly with me first. I'll see if I can nurture it into a jadeite butterfly. If you're lucky enough to evolve the Vajra butterfly into a jadeite butterfly at Bronze/Legend, it can undergo another qualitative transformation when you promote it into a fantasy breed. Upon hearing Lin Yuan's words, Chu Si circulated her spiritual energy to summon the Vajra butterfly. Chu Si naturally would not refuse Lin Yuan's suggestion and offer of help. Chu Si was no longer the little girl who did not know anything before she had contracted a Fey. She now understood very well how difficult it was to enhance a Fey's quality and make it mutate. Therefore, she understood how much effort Lin Yuan must have put into her first Fey. He must have used all the savings he could use at that time. Although Lin Yuan usually did not like to express his feelings, Chu Si had grown up in the Lin courtyard and knew how gentle he was. The Vajra butterfly was not only a Fey that Lin Yuan had enhanced, but it was also the first life form it had seen after hatching from the cocoon, so it naturally remembered Lin Yuan. Especially when it saw Lin Yuan leaning against the headboard, the Vajra butterfly flew to the tip of his nose. The Vajra butterfly flapped its wings and covered half of Lin Yuan's face. However, the scale powder scattered by the butterfly's wings was sucked into Lin Yuan's nose, causing him to sneeze 5 times in a row. After sneezing 5 times, Lin Yuan suddenly felt abnormally comfortable. He stored the Vajra butterfly in his spirit lock spatial zone and prepared to nurture it when he had time. After all, before nurturing the Vajra butterfly, he had to nurture the few golden peonies first. First update, asking for monthly votes and recommendation votes. End of this chapter. Chapter 525. Chu Si suddenly thought of her obsidian iron wild bull, which had already advanced to silver. However, Chu Si felt that the obsidian iron wild bull, which had evolved into a silver/fantasy breed, was not easy to use. Yuan, my fantasy breed obsidian iron wild bull has evolved from bronze to silver. Master said that obsidian iron raging bull's silver skill isn't bad, but I don't think it makes much of a difference when I spar with the seniors in combat class. After hearing her words, Lin Yuan immediately keenly captured the 2 words in her words. That word was master. In this world, master and teacher meant different things. In the Intermediate Spirit Chi Academy, Chu Si could address everyone who taught her as teacher. However, master referred to a relationship of inheritance, even though a master didn't necessarily only have one disciple. However, a person could only have one master in their lifetime. Lin Yuan was not in a hurry to answer her question. Chu Si, when did you have a master? Why haven't you mentioned it to me? Although she had grown up and could make her own decisions about taking on a master, Chu Si was still a child. However, Lin Yuan had never heard Chu Si mention such a big matter to him before, so he was really a little worried. Lin Yuan's first thought was that Chu Si was young and inexperienced. Could she have been deceived? Upon hearing that, Chu Si immediately stuck out her tongue and said with some grievance, "My master is Auntie Tsangyue. Auntie Tsangyue said she wanted to take me in as a disciple. I feel like the way she looks at me is similar to how Big Brother looks at me. It feels like I'm at home. I wanted to call you that night, but in the afternoon, I heard that you had been sucked into the evolving dimensional rift." When Lin Yuan heard that it was Tsangyu, he immediately felt relieved. It seemed that Tsangyue and Chu Si had gotten along very well over the past few months. He had actually taken Chu Si as his disciple. However, Lin Yuan did not ask about it in detail. Instead, he quickly changed the topic. As she had mentioned the evolving dimensional rift again, Lin Yuan was really afraid that she would cry like she had just now. Lin Yuan said hurriedly, "Chu Si, summon the obsidian iron wild bull. Let me see what's wrong with the silver skill." The fact that Cold Moon could say that it was a good skill proved that the obsidian iron wild bull's silver skill was not weak. However, Chu Si said that she wouldn't be able to use it in a battle with a senior during combat class. This situation made Lin Yuan immediately think of the problem of skill matching. When some Fays used their abilities, they would need some other conditions. Currently, Chu Ci wasn't strong enough to create such conditions for herself in battle, and her opponent couldn't help her create such conditions either. This was probably why Chu Ci couldn't use the Obsidian Iron Wild Bull's silver skill during combat class. Chu Ci immediately raised her hand and summoned the Obsidian Iron Wild Bull. He carefully used Morbius True Data to examine the Obsidian Iron Wild Bull. Fey name: Obsidian Iron Wild Bull, Spirit Species, Horn Species / Bull Species, Fey Grade. Silver, 5/10, Fey Type. Metal, Fey Quality. Fantasy Eye Abilities: Frowny Face Iron Horn. Attach strengthened metal to the rhinoceros horn and use it to pierce without regard for injuries. Sacrifice: when the contractor is injured, help the contractor share the damage. If the contractor is injured, feed back its vitality to the contractor. Pain Buffer: when receiving elemental damage, form a shield to isolate the elemental energy. It will buffer the elemental energy for a period of time on the surface of the body. The damage will only be sustained after the shield is broken. Exclusive skill: Frowny Face Pain Absorption. When receiving damage, absorb a portion of the damage and turn it into vitality. Annihilation Gaze: the Obsidian Iron Wild Bull's prideful battle consciousness and battle zeal drive its instinctive footsteps. It instantly transforms all the damage it receives in battle into a spiritual attack to counterattack the opponent. Lin Yuan's hand paused when he saw the Obsidian Iron Wild Bull's data, and the spirit tea in his hands spilled onto the blanket covering him. The blanket made of warm silk absorbed the spirit tea and spread out as though Lin Yuan had wet the bed. Lin Yuan's eyes widened as he looked at the Obsidian Iron Wild Bull in disbelief. The Obsidian Iron Wild Bull had reached Silver Rank 5. Its quality was no longer Fantasy I, but Fantasy II. It was currently extremely difficult for him to upgrade a fantasy breed phase quality. The fact that Chu Ci's Obsidian Iron Wild Bull had reached Fantasy II probably had something to do with her master, Cold Moon. Even so, Lin Yuan could not help but sigh again. Chu Ci's growth was simply too fast. It could even be said that she could fight Listen with just the Obsidian Iron Wild Bull's full power. Since the Obsidian Iron Wild Bull was Fantasy II, Listen's Pain Illusory Fox and Three-Tailed Crimson Fox were Fantasy I. Therefore, it was hard to say who would win and who would lose if they really fought. Chu Ci had been paying attention to Lin Yuan's expression. When she saw his strange expression after seeing the Obsidian Iron Wild Bull, she hurriedly asked, "Lin Yuan, do you also feel that the Obsidian Iron Wild Bull's silver abilities aren't very useful?" Lin Yuan quickly shook his head. He was pleasantly surprised by the Obsidian Iron Wild Bull's silver ability. To improve Chu Ci's overall combat power, the silver ability, Suffering Buffer, was much more useful than the elite ability, Sacrifice. As a defense-type Fey, the Obsidian Iron Wild Bull's Sacrifice ability was mainly used to protect Chu Ci as a contractor. However, after the Vajra Butterfly became a fantasy breed, its shield would be able to protect Chu Ci in battle. Therefore, Sacrifice could only be used as Chu Ci's trump card. Suffering Buffer was much more flexible. It was equivalent to giving the Obsidian Iron Wild Bull a temporary invincibility against elemental attacks. He did not know how long the Obsidian Iron Wild Bull's shield could last, but he did not know. However, no matter what, it could greatly enhance the Obsidian Iron Wild Bull's defense against elemental attacks. The Obsidian Iron Wild Bull was already extremely resistant to physical attacks, and now it had a temporary resistance to magic attacks. This would allow the Obsidian Iron Wild Bull to sit firmly in Chu Ci's position as a defense-type Spirit Chi professional's main Fey for a long time to come. For the first time, Lin Yuan felt that the Obsidian Iron Wild Bull did not look so reckless or stupid. At that moment, Lin Yuan heard Chu Ci sigh. "Lin Yuan, if only I could encounter more Feys that rely on elemental energy attacks on Star Web." When those elemental energies hit the Obsidian Iron Wild Bull's body, the Obsidian Iron Wild Bull's iron horn is much cooler than before. Upon hearing Chu Ci's sigh, Lin Yuan suddenly felt that he had wronged the Obsidian Iron Wild Bull. The obsidian iron wild bull was not reckless, but Chu Si's heart was. How reckless was Chu Si's heart? That was why he would think of using a good defensive ability as a damage output ability. At that moment, Lin Yuan thought of the burning sunflower that he had traded from the Indigo Azure Sea market. Lin Yuan suddenly regained his confidence. No matter how reckless Chu Si's heart was, as long as the burning sunflower was there, the plan to nurture his sister into an iron bucket would not fail. Second update. Seeking recommendation votes and monthly votes. I still owe Unparalleled and Twilight Melodies tips and updates. I'll return them in the next 2 days. Sob, sob, sob. Button has been worrying about work for the past 2 days. End of this chapter. Chapter 526. Lin Yuan felt that the current situation was really a coincidence. The burning sunflower that Lin Yuan had prepared for Chu Ci was a source-type life form that would cause a burning effect on all life forms except the contractor. After the burning sunflower was contracted, it would give birth to a burning sunflower flower spirit from its flower bud. Fairy source-type life forms had always been very intelligent. Since the burning sunflower was a fire-type fairy source-type life form, its temper was as abnormally violent as a burning flame. In battle, the burning sunflower would attach itself to a certain target while burning all the targets in the field according to its own preferences. If it attached itself to its own target, the target would have a layer of fire elemental shield and fire elemental immunity. If it attached itself to the enemy would suffer the fire elemental damage amplification effect and be burned continuously by the burning sunflower at close range. Since the burning sunflower was a fairy source-type life form, it could make its body spiritualize according to its abilities. This made the phase attached to it unable to use physical abilities to attack the burning sunflower flower spirit and get rid of its attachment. When the burning sunflower flower spirit attached itself to the enemy or one's own body, it was actually equivalent to a curse or blessing effect. However, the burning sunflower spirit wasn't without weaknesses. It wasn't very useful against fays that possessed the ability to disperse. The burning sunflower flower spirit was more outstanding in combat. However, the main reason Lin Yuan had firmly chosen the burning sunflower for Chu Ci was not because of its damage to the enemy. Instead, it could give Chu Ci fire elemental immunity effect and a layer of shield. When Lin Yuan had first seen the burning sunflower, he had felt that it was especially suitable for the obsidian iron wild bull's exclusive skill, pain absorption. It could also help the obsidian iron wild bull meet the precondition of annihilation gaze when no one was attacking it. In the future, Chu Ci's enemies could not all be spirit chi professionals with offensive abilities. The obsidian iron wild bull's exclusive skill, annihilation gaze, needed to be damaged in battle before it could transform the damage into a spiritual impact to return to the opponent. Once the precondition of the obsidian iron wild bull's exclusive skill, annihilation gaze, was met, even if Chu Ci faced support-type spirit chi professionals who were adept at control, traditional defense-type spirit chi professionals, or even heaven-defying healing-type spirit chi professionals, she would not have to be passive. However, after witnessing the obsidian iron wild bull's silver skill, he was stunned. On the contrary, Lin Yuan felt that burning sunflower was the most suitable for the obsidian iron wild bull's silver ability, suffering buffer. The fairy source-type life form, burning sunflower, hadn't contracted Chu Ci yet, so he didn't know what her skills and exclusive skills were. However, just the burning sunflower's ability alone made Lin Yuan exceptionally satisfied. Lin Yuan could not help but sigh. Many source-type items did not seem strong, but they were different. But as long as he followed the right master, he would be able to bring out his basic abilities to the extreme and carry out a deeper level of reasonable development. Every source-type item was an existence that could not be underestimated. Just like the burning sunflower's indiscriminate burning effect, it would be a burden to most fays. Chu Ci was a defense-type spirit chi professional and was about to possess a fantasy breed Vajra butterfly. The Vajra butterfly's shield and the burning sunflower flower spirit's fire elemental immunity could protect Chu Ci's contracted fays from burning damage. This was also why when spirit chi professionals were choosing fays, apart from hoping to have an outstanding fay, they would also have to choose one. They hoped that their contracted phase could promote each other and form a complete combat system. The addition of the burning sunflower to Chu Si's combat system was equivalent to directly injecting nuclear power into the obsidian iron wild bull's human-powered bicycle. Lin Yuan only hoped that Chu Si would have fewer tricks up her sleeve when contracting the burning sunflower. It would be good if the burning sunflower did not have some strange, useless abilities and exclusive skills. Even though Chu Si had yet to contract the burning sunflower, Lin Yuan felt that his plan to nurture his iron bucket sister was already considered preliminary. In his previous life, Lin Yuan had not been a homebody, but he had always been dragged by his classmates to play Elo. Every time Lin Yuan played any hero, as long as he encountered the Demacia force, he would definitely be defeated. No matter how hard Lin Yuan tried, he could not get rid of the 0-8 situation. Therefore, he had learned from this painful experience. In this life, Lin Yuan had decided to forge Chu Si into an iron bucket. He had to forge Chu Si into someone like the Demacia force. The obsidian iron wild bull's exclusive skill, pain absorption, was equivalent to giving Chu Si a set of frenzy armor. The Vajra butterfly's exclusive skill, counterattack tremor, was equivalent to giving Chu Si a layer of thorns armor. As long as Chu Si contracted the burning sunflower, it was equivalent to giving Chu Si another sun flame cloak. Lin Yuan just wanted to ask, frenzy, thorns, and sun flame. How could Demacia lose? If he wanted to nurture his sister, he had to nurture his sister into Demacia. Only such an elder brother could be considered a good elder brother. Chu Si looked at Lin Yuan, who had been fine at first, and then suddenly froze. Chu Si hurriedly waved her hand in front of Lin Yuan and found that he still had not reacted. She did not know what he was thinking. Chu Si looked at Lin Yuan suspiciously and could not help but blink. At that moment, Chu Si really wanted to post a request for help on the Star Web forum. The name of the post would be, "My big brother is in a daze for no reason. Am I going to have a sister-in-law soon?" Chu Si cleared her throat and decided to test Lin Yuan. "Big brother, it's New Year's in 2 days. Who are you going to spend the New Year's with?" When Lin Yuan heard Chu Si's words, his mind was thinking about starting to nurture Demacia's younger sister, 5-0, while he was also thinking about the burning sunflower's other possibilities. Lin Yuan's brain was working at full speed. Lin Yuan hoped that after becoming a fantasy breed, the Vajra butterfly could also have some connection with the fairy source-type life form, the burning sunflower. This way, Chu Si would form a combat system with the obsidian iron wild bull as the tactical core and the 3-phase as one. As he was thinking about the problem, Lin Yuan subconsciously said, "I'm going to spend it with you, of course." Upon hearing Lin Yuan's words, Chu Si did not have time to react. She saw Lin Yuan immediately cough and turned to look at her with a dumbfounded expression. Chu Si saw Lin Yuan immediately cough and turned to look at her with a dumbfounded expression. "What's going on? Why is the New Year's in 2 days?" Chu Si nodded. Lin Yuan remembered that when he had been sucked into the dimensional rift, there were still 10 days before the New Year's. He clearly remembered that it had only taken him half a day to stop the dimensional rift's evolution. In this way, he had been unconscious for more than 7 days. "I've been too busy recently. Sob, sob, sob. I'm done for. Sob, 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 it's too late. I have to be diligent." End of this chapter. Chapter 527. Lin Yuan subconsciously wanted to touch his pocket. However, when he touched his pocket, he realized that the clothes on his body had been changed by someone at some point in time. His original moon-white spirit chi clothes had been changed into a moon-colored home dress that he and his master, the Moon Empress, usually wore. Just as he was looking for his phone, he suddenly remembered that the Mother of Bloodbath had taken it before he had been sucked into the dimensional rift. Lin Yuan hurriedly turned his head and looked at Chu Si. "Chu Si, lend me your phone, I'll make a call." When Chu Si saw the worried look on his face, she hurriedly handed over the cell phone. At the same time, he thought, is there really a situation since Lin Yuan is so anxious? Before he lost consciousness, he could be sure that he had healed Lu Jie's injuries, but he could not be sure if Lu Jie's spirit had been affected by the purplish-gray poison. In the 7 days that he had been unconscious, the insect queen's mutation should be coming to an end. In addition to Lu Jie, Lin Yuan was also very worried about Zhou Luo. However, Lin Yuan was not worried about Zhou Luo's safety. As Zhou Luo was an oath-keeper who had sworn to Lin Yuan with a willpower rune, Lin Yuan could be sure that Zhou Luo was still alive. Lin Yuan took her cell phone and was about to make a call. Then, he remembered that Lu Jie's number wasn't saved in Chu Si's phone. Lin Yuan did not have the habit of memorizing phone numbers, so he summoned Genius with his spiritual energy. Lin Yuan asked Genius, "Smart, what's Brother Lu's phone number?" Although Genius had evolved into the 1,000 Questions beast, it was no longer the same as before. However, as a housekeeping beast, its intelligence did not fall behind at all. Instead, it became stronger. Genius said in a childish voice. As soon as Genius reported Lu Jie's phone number, it immediately pounced into Lin Yuan's arms and hugged his neck tightly with its small claws. In the evolving dimensional rift, Genius had been transformed into a mask by Lin Yuan. It could be said that Genius and Lin Yuan were witnessing everything in the spirit lock spatial zone from the same perspective. Lin Yuan's hands were being eroded by the dimensional wave, revealing his bones. Genius was trembling with fear when it saw this. But at such a time, Genius could only look on helplessly and couldn't do anything. Lin Yuan had already comforted Genius in the spiritual world, but it was still so nervous after being summoned. It could be seen how worried Genius was previously. Lin Yuan stroked Genius' 3 tails and was about to use his hand to scratch Genius' furry neck. Genius raised its head and looked at him seriously. Although Genius still had tears in its eyes, its tone was incomparably serious. "Yuan, I want to become stronger. I can help you." When Lin Yuan heard that, he revealed a smile and rubbed Genius's little head. "Cleverness has always been able to help me. Knowledge is power. Being smart has always been great." After hearing Lin Yuan's words, Genius used its little claw to gesture in the air. "Yuan, Genius is only as powerful as 1 piece of red braised pork now. In the future, Genius will definitely work hard to become as powerful as 100 pieces of red braised pork." After Genius finished speaking, it extended its front paw and waved at Lin Yuan in midair. Lin Yuan quickly pinched Genius' little claw that was waving in the air. He touched the soft pads under Genius' little claw and shook it twice solemnly. Then he stretched out his finger and hooked Genius' little claw. "Then let's make a promise and wait for the day Genius becomes as powerful as 100 pieces of red braised pork." Genius' big blue eyes flickered, and the layer of water in its eyes that had yet to dry was still a little moist. Genius' little face revealed a human-like smile. However, before Genius could say anything, Chu Si had already carried it away. Chu Si carried Genius in her arms and started to stroke its fur skillfully. Chu Si's actions immediately made Genius purr in comfort. "Little Genius, did you miss me?" After speaking, Chu Si took out a few pieces of meat from the Fey storage box that Lin Yuan had custom-made for her. She tore the fragrant meat into small pieces and brought them to Genius' mouth. Lin Yuan had been unconscious for such a long time, and Genius had no appetite to eat. Over the past 7 days, most of the Rotten Lufa in the Spirit Lock spatial zone had already ripened and fallen to the ground. As Genius had been worried, Lin Yuan didn't feel hungry. But now, when Genius smelled the jerky in Chu Si's hand, its stomach immediately growled. However, Genius did not immediately eat the jerky that Chu Si handed to it. Instead, it spoke in a childish voice. "Smart, I really miss Chu Si. As much as 1,000 pieces of red braised pork." When Lin Yuan heard Genius' words, he raised his brows. Genius was doted on everywhere in the manor. Even a middle-aged uncle like Hu Quan liked to hug Genius in his arms when he had nothing to do. Now, he finally knew the reason. At that moment, Lu Jie picked up Lin Yuan's call. After picking up the call, Lin Yuan was the first to ask. "Brother Lu, how is your body recovering?" Lu Jie did not answer Lin Yuan's question directly this time. Instead, he could not help but ask. "Lin Yuan, your body over there." Before Lu Jie finished speaking, Lin Yuan heard Wen Yu's voice over the phone. "Brother Lu, is it young master calling?" If young master is calling, put it on speaker. Has young master recovered over there? As soon as when you finished speaking, Lin Yuan immediately heard her voice amplify several times. All of you come over. Young master is calling. In less than half a minute, Lin Yuan heard Endless Summer, Hu Quan, the mother of Bloodbath, Listen, and Zhou Luo's voices. These voices were filled with anxiety as they asked about the condition of his body. Lin Yuan's heart warmed. After informing everyone that he was safe and chatting for a while, Lin Yuan said, "I'll go back tomorrow. There are 2 more days until the new year. We'll go out and prepare the New Year's goods together." Lin Yuan was looking forward to this new year. Last year, Lin Yuan had spent the new year with Chu Si in the Xia region. This year, Lin Yuan and Chu Si had started a new life and had so many warm fetters. Before hanging up the phone, Lin Yuan was about to ask Lu Jie if the insect queen had completed its mutation. At that moment, Lu Jie said, "Lin Yuan, I just received a notice from the Radiance Sacred Hall." "Yuan, I just received a notice from the Radiance Sacred Hall. The chief guard of the spirit guards wants to see me." Upon hearing that Lu Jie had something to do, Lin Yuan did not ask about the insect queen's mutation. Anyway, Lin Yuan would return to the mansion tomorrow. If there was really something wrong with the insect queen, he would know once he used true data to check. Just as he hung up the phone, an unusually clear and ethereal voice suddenly came from the depths of Lin Yuan's soul. "My lord, I hope that readers who like this book will come to QQ to support the original version and subscribe to it. Hee, thank you very much." The second one was even worse. Sob, sob, sob. End of this chapter. Chapter 528. Upon hearing this voice, Lin Yuan was immediately startled. Lin Yuan had already found the source of this voice. It came from the depths of his soul. Lin Yuan subconsciously thought into the depths of his soul and found that the depths of his soul, which he had previously been unable to reach, were now unobstructed. Upon entering the depths of his soul, Lin Yuan immediately discovered that one of his 2 human-shaped phantoms had a girl with her eyes closed, a crown on her head, and a sharp sword in her arms. Lin Yuan used true data to examine the girl floating in midair in the soul phantom. Upon seeing the information displayed under true data, Lin Yuan suddenly did not know what to say. Could sacred source lifeforms be fused? Under Morbius true data, the girl with closed eyes, wearing a crown, and holding a sharp sword was not a sacred source lifeform. Instead, it was the state of 2 sacred source lifeforms fused together. These 2 sacred source lifeforms were currently fusing from 2 to 1. This immediately made Lin Yuan recall the scene in his dream where the girl with her eyes closed seemed to be threatened by the reddish-gold light and reluctantly embraced the sharp sword. Under true data, the name of the girl with her eyes closed was the sacred source lifeform, Grace Queen. The name of the sword engraved with gorgeous patterns on the hilt was the sacred source lifeform, Sacred Punishment Sword. Under true data, the fusion rate of these 2 sacred source lifeforms had reached 70%. There was still 30% left before they could completely fuse and become a new sacred source lifeform. Based on the time he had been unconscious, Lin Yuan made a rough calculation. This meant that he would know in about 3 days. When these 2 sacred source lifeforms fused, the Grace Queen and the Sacred Punishment Sword, what kind of sacred source lifeform would be formed? When the Grace Queen fused with the sacred source lifeform, the Execution Sword, it was equivalent to sealing their own abilities and fusing them together. Since the 2 had already fused to about 70%, Lin Yuan could not use true data to find out the specific functions of the Grace Queen and the Sacred Punishment Sword. However, based on the name alone, the Grace Queen should be a sacred source lifeform with supportive abilities. The Executioner Sword was a sacred source lifeform with offensive abilities. Lin Yuan was not worried at all about what the Grace Princess and the Pursuit Holy Sword would fuse into. He only had a strong anticipation. His master, the Moon Empress, and the Mother of Bloodbath had both said that every sacred source lifeform had an irreplaceable function. As a result, there were no weak sacred source lifeforms. In his opinion, even if he did not know why the 2 sacred source lifeforms would fuse in his soul, he should be able to understand why. However, a sacred source life form formed from the fusion of two sacred source life forms should be much stronger than the original sacred source life form. Otherwise, wouldn't he have fused with it for nothing? In the depths of Lin Yuan's soul, he could hear the crown on her head and her eyes closed as she hugged the sacred sword. Even in her deep sleep, she still kept calling out to him, "My lord, my lord." Lin Yuan could feel a throbbing in his bloodline. The throbbing of his bloodline caused him to be tightly connected to this girl who had her eyes tightly shut, wore a crown on her head, and held a sacred sword in her arms. When Lin Yuan had held the two sacred source life forms to prevent the dimensional rift from evolving, they had absorbed a lot of his blood. It even absorbed some of Lin Yuan's bone marrow from his shattered bones. If not for the fact that this girl with the crown on her head was an illusory spiritual body, Lin Yuan would not have been able to recognize her. Just this feeling of blood connection made Lin Yuan feel as though he had raised a daughter. Lin Yuan did not think too much about it. He only needed to wait for 3 days. He would then be able to clearly understand the functions of the fused sacred source life form with true data. When Lin Yuan came back to his senses, he realized that Genius had already turned into a cat pancake in Chu Si's arms. Its 3 little tails were wagging non-stop with a satisfied expression. In fact, when Lin Yuan had hung up the phone, he had noticed that Chu Si was looking at him with a hopeful expression. At the same time, there was a hint of shyness. Lin Yuan immediately knew what Chu Si was thinking. Chu Si hugged Genius with both hands, and Lin Yuan reached out to stroke her hair. After pressing down the ahog on top of Chu Si's head, he said, "Buy whatever you want for the new year. Buy whatever you want during the New Year's shopping. This New Year's blackback mountain pork and big head fish soup will be enough." Upon hearing Lin Yuan's words, Chu Si burst out laughing. Although Chu Si did not know how many resources Lin Yuan had, just the pocket money that Lin Yuan would send to her Star Web card every once in a while was enough. It was enough to buy several blackback mountain pork and fathead fish farms. In addition, Chu Si had been eating the nutritious set meals that Lin Yuan had ordered from the Spirit Food Pavilion. Basically, she could eat ingredients that were more than 10 times better than the blackback mountain pork and fathead fish soup. However, when Lin Yuan mentioned the blackback mountain pork and fathead fish soup, Chu Si could not help but feel a strong sense of warmth in her heart. No matter what happened in the future, the taste of the blackback mountain pork and fathead fish soup had long been engraved in Chu Si's mind. In Chu Si's 16 years of life, the taste of the blackback mountain pork and fathead fish soup was equivalent to the taste of spending the new year with Lin Yuan. "Big brother, don't be reluctant to eat the fish head in the fathead fish soup this new year." Upon hearing Chu Si's words, Lin Yuan reached out and rubbed his nose. Chu Si had really misunderstood this matter. Every new year, Lin Yuan would indeed leave the blackback mountain pork's lean meat for Chu Si. He would eat some of the meat skin that Chu Si did not like or a few spoonfuls of vegetable soup. However, Lin Yuan did not eat the fish head in the fathead fish soup not only because Chu Si liked it. It was also because Lin Yuan did not like to eat things with a strong fishy smell at all. In this aspect, Genius was in line with Lin Yuan's taste. After Chu Si finished speaking, the hopeful expression on her face disappeared. For Chu Si, every New Year was the time when she and Lin Yuan would hold a few $100 Federation to buy New Year's goods. It could be considered the thing that Chu Si had looked forward to the most when she was young. Now that Chu Si had grown up, her longing was no longer the joy of eating good things when she bought New Year's goods. It was more because she could still do some things with Lin Yuan like when they were young. When the hope on Chu Si's face disappeared, the shyness and uneasiness on Chu Si's face became more intense. Lin Yuan looked at Chu Si's expression and smiled brightly, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. The first time, end of this chapter. Chapter 529. Don't you already know Lu Jie and Wenyu? You've seen them before when we were video chatting. They're all looking forward to your arrival. Wenyu had already started to decorate your room when the house was being built. Uncle who knows that you like blackback mountain boars, so he made some wood carvings of blackback mountain boars for you. Upon hearing his words, Chu Si felt that she should not defend herself at this time. She could not remember how many times she had told Lin Yuan that she only liked to eat blackback mountain boar meat, not blackback mountain boars. However, after thinking about it, every time Lin Yuan explained, Lin Yuan would seem to be afraid that she would think too much and would hint to her that she could choose any fei she liked. She didn't have to pay too much attention to this feeling, so she decided to give up on the treatment. Upon hearing that, the shy expression on Chu Si's face disappeared. After Chu Si grew up a little, she also helped Lin Yuan greet the customers who came to the fei store. Although she wasn't good with words, she didn't think that she was a bashful person. It was just that a 16-year-old girl like Chu Si was still a little nervous about getting to know so many of her brother's friends. After all, even if Chu Si was acquainted with everyone in the manor, she had only gotten to know them through video chat. She had never met them in real life. Chu Si suddenly recalled Cold Yu's suggestion to her before she became her master, so she told Lin Yuan, "Don't worry. Big brother, Master said that if I can obtain the Redbud 100 qualifications this year, then I can represent the Redbud 100 to participate in the Radiance 100 sequences selection next year. I will also have the chance to fight for the 10 Radiance 100 spots. If I can fight for the Radiance 100 spots, Master suggests that I skip grades and enter the Royal Capital's Advanced Spirit Chi University." Upon hearing that, Lin Yuan did not help Chu Si come up with an idea like before. Instead, he smiled and said to Chu Si, "Little girl, you've already grown up. You can make your own decisions about these things." Perhaps Chu Si was not necessarily the one who understood Lin Yuan the most in this world. However, Lin Yuan was the one who understood her the most in this world. Although Chu Si was usually quiet, she was also a person with her own ideas. The fact that she had mentioned this to him meant that she had already made up her mind to skip grades and study in the Royal Capital's Advanced Spirit Chi University. Lin Yuan had gritted his teeth and chosen to let Chu Si continue to attend school under such difficult conditions. It was because he wanted her to have a complete childhood and learn the knowledge she needed to learn like a child with parents. However, she had chosen to walk the path of a genius through her talent and hard work. When Chu Si's school reopened after the holiday, she would have 2 fantasy breed feis and a fairy source-type life form, the burning sunflower. It was likely that none of the seniors who had participated in the mock competition with Chu Si would be a match for her now. Under such circumstances, for someone like Chu Si, who was adept at discovering problems in actual combat and making progress, it would be difficult for her to do so. It was equivalent to losing many opportunities to hone oneself. Thus, from the perspective of Chu Si's growth, attending a high-level Spirit Chi University in the Royal Capital was the best choice. At that time, Chu Si could commute every day and return to the manor directly after school. The brother and sister could live together every day. Chu Si replied with a smile. "Then I'll do as Master says and strive to skip a grade next year to study at the Royal Capital Advanced Spirit Chi University." Lin Yuan pinched Chu Si's nose and thought to himself, "She's quite ambitious." However, when he thought of Chu Si's obsidian iron wild bull, which had been upgraded to Fantasy 2 at Silver, he realized that Chu Si already had a master. Furthermore, her master was an expert like Cold Moon. He suddenly felt that she might really be able to enter the Radiance 100 sequence tomorrow. Lin Yuan had been awake for a while, so he lifted the blanket and got out of bed. "Chu Si, let's go out. Master and the others must be worried sick." Lin Yuan's expression turned slightly cold. At that moment, the gray-haired, gray-eyed man who called himself Hunting Ashes appeared in Lin Yuan's mind. After the gray-haired, gray-eyed man injured Lu Jie and thought that they were dead for sure, he said the name 7th Page War. It could be said that these 2 pieces of information were all the information Lin Yuan could grasp about the enemy in this evolving dimensional rift. Now that he was in the Radiant Moon Palace, he could tell the Moon Empress about it. It was also good to see if his master, the Moon Empress, could find out who exactly the other party was or what faction they were from. At this moment, Lu Jie was confused. He might be the Radiance 100 sequence number 30. But no matter what, he did not deserve to be personally received by the chief guard of the Spirit Guards. Furthermore, the chief guard of the Spirit Guards had personally informed the Radiance Sacred Hall about this matter. Then, the Radiance Sacred Hall had relayed the message to him. It could be said to be very formal. However, the more formal it was, the more Lu Jie found it unusual. Lu Jie had his own guesses. He felt that he would be summoned by the chief guard of the spirit guards. It was very likely related to the dimensional rift that had appeared in the coastal sea outside Indigo Azure City. Although this was a serious matter, the guard envoys of the spirit guards were more than capable of receiving him personally. In fact, other than the guard envoys, there were also the left and right attendants of the spirit guards who could handle this matter. There was no need for the chief guard at all. While Lu Jie was still trying to figure out what was going on, he arrived at the lakeside of the Spirit Suppression Lake where the spirit guards resided. As long as Lu Jie walked to the center of the Spirit Suppression Lake from the chain bridge, he would arrive at the spirit guards' territory. He had just arrived at the lakeside of the Spirit Sealing Lake and was about to step onto the chain bridge that led to the Spirit Suppressing Division's territory. Lu Jie saw a black-robed woman with a veil over her face standing at the center of the chain bridge. The woman stood on the chain bridge with her hands behind her back. There was not the slightest bit of spiritual energy fluctuation, just like an ordinary person. No matter how the east wind blew the rope bridge, the woman's figure was as still as a bronze beast on the side of the rope bridge. As a Radiance 100 sequence member, Lu Jie had met the chief guard of the spirit guards before. Based on the attire of the woman on the chain bridge and the fact that she had appeared on a chain bridge within the spirit guard's territory, it was easy to tell that she was dressed like this. Lu Jie immediately confirmed the woman's identity. Second Gung, asking for monthly votes and recommendation votes. Button will work on weekends, no breaks. Sob, 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 but try to chase Unparalleled in the World and Twilight Melody out. Sorry, I owe you a few days. Sob, sob, sob. End of this chapter. Chapter 530. At that moment, a thought suddenly occurred to Lu Jie. Could the chief guard be waiting for me here? However, he quickly tossed the thought to the back of his mind. The chief guard of the spirit guards had a lot of things to deal with during the active phase of the dimensional rift. How could she have so much time to wait for him here? Lu Jie looked at the black-robed chief guard, whose face was covered with a black veil, on the chain bridge. The chief guard of the spirit guards seemed to sense Lu Jie's gaze. She turned her head and looked in Lu Jie's direction. Even though they were very far apart, the moment she turned around, Lu Jie saw a pair of pitch-black eyes. Lu Jie immediately saw a pair of eyes that were as dark as the night. Being stared at by these pitch-black eyes, Lu Jie suddenly felt a trace of indescribable pressure. It was like a fish out of water in the final long night without stars, about to be sealed by the long night and sink into oblivion forever. Lu Jie had already stepped onto the chain bridge and was walking toward the other side. The chief guard of the spirit guards kept staring at him, which made Lu Jie feel strange. However, Lu Jie had no choice but to bite the bullet and walk forward one step at a time. The more he walked, the more Lu Jie muttered in his heart. There was no one else on the chain bridge except for him. Moreover, the chief guard of the spirit guards kept looking in his direction and did not move. It really seemed like the chief guard of the spirit guards had been waiting for him here. Lu Jie hurriedly walked 2 steps to the side of the chief guard of the spirit guards. After thinking for a long time, Lu Jie did not know what to say. In the end, Lu Jie could only say respectfully, "Greetings, chief guard." "Greetings, chief guard, what a coincidence." When Night-Leaning Moon heard Lu Jie speak, she turned around and made space beside her. She motioned for Lu Jie to step forward and walk beside her. Following that, Lu Jie heard an unusually calm voice that was as melodious as the hooves of a yellow oriole. Upon hearing this voice, Lu Jie did not know why, but he suddenly thought of Chaime's cry. Because of Bai Hao, Lu Jie had also heard the sparrow voice Lowly Goddess sing a few times in the Star Web's attractive section. In the past, Lu Jie had only marveled at the sparrow voice Lowly Goddess's beautiful voice, which could actually be compared to Chaime's. Now Lu Jie suddenly had a thought. Could the chief guard of the attractive section be the spirit guard's chief guard? As soon as he had this thought, he threw it to the back of his mind. How could he have come up with such an absurd idea? Could it be that his brain was damaged due to the effects of the mental toxin in the dimensional rift? However, Lu Jie's expression immediately changed when he heard the chief guard's words. he was both surprised and somewhat solemn. "Unfortunately, I was originally waiting for you here. Your insect queen has not awoken from its mutated state. However, looking at the days, the insect queen should have absorbed most of the poison in the Blade Queen Bee's life poison core. Jie's treatment and Silver Demon Jie's body, Lu Guard Lin, of Jie's Ling Ling Jie's Lu. However, Lin Yuan's healing and the Silver Stamen Gold Luster Cash's baptism were only effective on the body. If Lin Yuan had not given Lu Jie a lot of cinnabar sweet osmanthus flower paste, Lu Jie might have woken up a few days later than Lin Yuan. Even so, Lu Jie still slept for 5 days and woke up only 2 days earlier than Lin Yuan. When Lu Jie woke up, he found himself lying in his room in the manor. According to Wen Yu, it was the man called Uncle Mystic who had brought her back. Not only did the chief guard of the spirit guards know about his insect queen situation, but she also knew about it in such detail. This meant that the chief guard should have been present when he was spat out by the dimensional rift while unconscious and had personally checked on the insect queen's situation. However, when he heard the chief guard of the spirit guards mention the insect queen, he recalled the time when he felt the insect queen's state. In the process of evolution and mutation, the insect queen was in an awkward state where it could neither advance nor retreat. It was only after hearing the chief guard mention the Blade Queen Bee's natal poison core that he realized what the gray-haired, gray-eyed man had thrown over in the dimensional rift. The insect queen had absorbed the Blade Queen Bee's natal poison core in order to mutate. However, because the Blade Queen Bee's natal poison core did not have enough poison, the insect queen could not absorb enough poison and complete its mutation through the Blade Queen Bee's natal poison core. However, the poison had already been integrated into the insect queen's genetic model during the mutation process. If the insect queen's current state of stagnation during the mutation continued for a long time, it was likely to cause the insect queen bee's natal poison core to backfire. If that really happened, the insect queen's natal poison core, which had been engraved in the genetic model, would explode in its body. The insect queen's spiritual energy would be severely damaged by the Blade Queen Bee's spiritual poison. The worst-case scenario was that the insect queen might die from the poison's backlash. Most people would not easily talk about such a private matter like the phase state. However, since the chief guard of the spirit guards had asked, Lu Jie did not hide it and simply explained the insect queen's current state. While Lu Jie was talking about the insect queen situation, he had already passively followed Night Leaning Moon's footsteps through the chain bridge and stepped onto the land of spirit suppression. They headed toward the study room that Night Leaning Moon usually stayed in. After Night Leaning Moon understood the insect queen's situation, she immediately said, "Your contracted insect queen's current condition will be resolved. The insect queen that you're contracted with is currently in such a state. You only need to absorb the prime venom in the Blade Empress Bee's venom core once more to resolve it." A wry smile appeared on Lu Jie's face when he heard that. Carcinoma phase were already very rare in this world, let alone the fact that he had to find a specific carcinoma phase. This was a task that was as difficult as ascending to heaven. At that moment, Lu Jie heard Night Leaning Moon speaking unhurriedly again. "What you said just now was a coincidence, and you weren't wrong. Among the carcinoma phase that the spirit guards have taken in, there is a Blade Queen Bee." While speaking, Night Leaning Moon was already sitting at the table in her study room, where she usually looked through the secret letters submitted by the various guard envoys. When Lu Jie heard Night Leaning Moon's words, he immediately revealed a pleasantly surprised expression. How could he have forgotten that the spirit guards and guard envoys of the Radiance Federation had all the malignant phase and high-grade phase that were found in the Radiance Federation in the land of spirit suppression? How could he have forgotten that the spirit guards and guard envoys had stored all the malignant phase and high-grade phase in this land of spirit suppression? The spirit guards were in charge of all the phase in the world. From the chief guard's words, it seemed like he could take out the natal poison core from the Blade Queen Bee's natal poison core for the insect queen to use. The first one was even better. End of this chapter. Chapter 5:31. Lu Jie quickly thanked her. "Thank you, Chief Guard." Night Leaning Moon's hand paused for a moment before she placed the pen back on the table and said, "Don't thank me yet. Don't be in a hurry to thank me. This is the reward you deserve for your contribution in the evolving dimensional rift. However, I'll give you two options. One is to obtain the Blade Queen Bee's natal poison core and allow the Insect Queen to complete its mutation. If you have the ability to rank in the top 10 of the Radiance 100 sequence within 2 years, you will be qualified to fight for the Radiance Envoy position. The Spirit Guards will give you another Sacred Source life form. When Lu Jie heard the Chief Guard of the Spirit Guards mention the first option, he was immediately shocked. The first option actually had a Sacred Source life form as a reward. However, it would not be easy to obtain this Sacred Source life form as a reward. The Radiance 100 sequence members were all concealing their strength, and everyone was probably holding back their anger. He wanted to become a dark horse and charge into the top 10 of the Radiance 100 sequence in 2 years to obtain the qualification to compete for the Radiance Envoy position. It could be said that the first condition was equivalent to the Spirit Guards investing a huge amount of money in him. However, if he wanted to obtain this investment, he had to first prove himself. That was a Sacred Source life form. A Class 5-dimensional rift that required the combined efforts of countless experts to resist could only produce one Sacred Source life form each time. Such an item was something that Lu Jie had never dared to dream of. However, Lu Jie's desire for the Sacred Source life form was no less than anyone else's. After all, Lu Jie could only contract the Insect Queen, which was a Source-type life form. He did not have as many choices as the others. However, Lu Jie did not immediately agree to the first generous option. Instead, he asked, "What is it?" "Chief Guard, what about the second option?" Right after Lu Jie asked this question, Night Leaning Moon replied in a very straightforward manner. "The second option is to become my disciple." Lu Jie had been secretly shocked when he heard about the Sacred Source life form. However, when he heard that the second option could decide whether he could become the Chief Guard's disciple, Lu Jie felt as though his heart was about to jump out of his throat. Wasn't this too exciting? Was there even a need to choose to become the Chief Guard's disciple? Anyone who wasn't stupid would choose the second option without hesitation. Although Lu Jie wasn't stupid, he couldn't choose immediately. Powerhouses always paid attention to many things when accepting disciples. Very few powerhouses could tolerate their disciples who had already sworn an oath with a willpower rune. This was because the oath of the willpower rune represented an irresistible constraint. He had already sworn an oath with the willpower rune to become Lin Yuan's retainer knight. For Lu Jie, becoming the Chief Guard's disciple could be considered a blessing in disguise. In the past, Lu Jie would have fought for this opportunity with all his might. However, in Lu Jie's heart, becoming the Chief Guard's disciple wasn't the most important thing. Lu Jie reached out and touched the Class 2 Creation Master Retainer crest on his chest. Lu Jie could not help but feel a little distressed. Perhaps during the Dimensional Rift's evolution, a small corner of the Class 2 Creation Master's retainer crest that Lin Yuan had given him had been blown off. This Class 2 Creation Master Retainer crest gave Lu Jie new hope. After Lu Jie returned to the Radiance 100 sequence, he had never hidden his identity as a Class 2 Creation Master Retainer. Every time he went out, no matter what clothes he wore, he would carefully wear the Class 2 Creation Master Retainer crest on his chest. In the Radiance 100 sequence, Lu Jie wearing the Class 2 Creation Master Retainer crest didn't cause any uproar. However, this was only the case in the Radiance 100 sequence. As the Radiance 100 sequence number 30, the news of Lu Jie wearing the Class 2 Creation Master Retainer crest quickly blew up on the Star Web's post bar and forums. Perhaps many people thought that becoming a Class 2 Creation Master Retainer was not a glorious thing given Lu Jie's identity. However, this Class 2 Creation Master Retainer crest, which might seem dishonorable to others, was his life. Lu Jie was already thinking that when he left the Spirit Guards, if the Chief Guard had no other matters, he would dare to go back before tonight. He would first go to the Royal Capital's Creation Master Association to mend this Class 2 Creation Master Retainer crest. If he couldn't make it in time, he would buy some ingredients first. When Lin Yuan returned to the mansion, he would be able to have a good meal that he cooked. Night Leaning Moon was one of the top experts in the Radiance Federation, one of the 13 seats in the Imperial Court Council, and her identity was on par with the Moon Empress. However, when she expressionlessly said that the second choice was to become her disciple, she couldn't help but feel a little nervous. The stronger one was, the more they would pay attention to their fetters. Night-leaning Moon had never accepted a disciple before. She wanted to accept one because she saw the changes in the Moon Empress after finding a disciple. She thought that it was time for her to find a legacy. However, Night-leaning Moon had already said that she wanted to accept a disciple, but there was no response for a long time. Night-leaning Moon hated waiting for others to make a decision because of the shadow of her childhood. What kind of human suffering was this? Night-leaning Moon held the pen in her hand and twirled it a few times, waiting for Lu Jie to make a decision. At this moment, Night-leaning Moon saw Lu Jie raise his head and speak in a very straightforward manner. Chief Guard, I have already sworn on a willpower rune to become someone else's retainer. Without him, I wouldn't be where I am now. If you mind me becoming someone else's retainer, then I will choose the first option. After hearing Lu Jie's words, Night-leaning Moon immediately put her pen on the table. His fingers lightly tapped on the table. He felt that the disciple he was about to accept was not very bright. Since he had decided to accept her as his disciple, shouldn't he have investigated her thoroughly? When thinking about the relationship between Lu Jie and the Moon Empress disciple, Night-leaning Moon couldn't help but recall the time when she and the Moon Empress were young. Back then, he had almost become the Moon Empress retainer knight. However, the Moon Empress had scolded him for not being able to take care of himself and for singing out of tune. He did not become the Moon Empress retainer knight. He had allowed Song Yu, the stupid girl who didn't know how to smile, and Mystic Moon, the stinky spirit creature, to take the lead. Time was always full of twists and turns. He always thought that it was too far away for him to see clearly, but now it suddenly appeared in front of him. If he were to accept Lu Jie as his disciple, everything would form a reincarnation cycle. Night-leaning Moon rather admired Lu Jie's straightforwardness. His disciple might be a little silly, but he was surprisingly honest. My name is Night-leaning Moon. I will be your master from now on. Second more. Begging for monthly votes, recommendation votes, moi. Button wishing the big sister reading a book a happy goddess day. End of this chapter. Chapter 5:32. With that, Night-leaning Moon waved her hand and threw a box carved from white jade at Lu Jie. Through the outside of the white jade box, Lu Jie could faintly see a layer of rainbow light shining inside. When he saw the rainbow light inside the white jade box, he felt that it was unusually familiar, as though he had seen it not long ago. Lu Jie could not help but have a guess in his heart. When Lu Jie opened the white jade box, he saw a ball of rainbow light inside. The seven-colored ball of light was the legendary Sacred Source life form. When he suddenly received the Sacred Source life form from his newly acknowledged master, Lu Jie felt a little surprised and terrified. Lu Jie did not accept the white jade box containing the Sacred Source life form. Instead, he hurriedly placed the box on the table in front of Night-leaning Moon and said, "Master, I haven't completed the first condition. I haven't reached the top 10 of the Radiance 100 sequence and obtained the right to compete for the Radiance Envoy position." Night-leaning Moon waved her hand again. A few petals that glowed with blue light immediately appeared on the table. The bottom of these petals was as blue as the sea, and there was still flower juice that had not yet dried. They carried a fragrance that relaxed the soul. It was obvious that they had been picked not long ago. Since you call me master, I naturally have to fulfill my responsibility as a master. How can I, Night-leaning Moon, not have a Sacred Source life form as my disciple? You're already over 20 years old, so you can totally contract a Sacred Source life form. These few petals of blue snow soul fragrance flower juice can protect your soul and allow you to contract the Sacred Source life form without suffering any damage to your soul. Why don't you form a contract with this Sacred Source life form while I protect you here? If Lu Jie's words were said to be very straightforward, then Lu Jie's words were completely different. Now, Night-leaning Moon spoke as though it was a matter of course. She did not know why, but when she heard Lu Jie say the word master, Night-leaning Moon only felt that her entire body had a different kind of feeling. It could be said to be a sense of responsibility. However, This sense of responsibility gave Night Leaning Moon a very subtle feeling. Unlike the heavy sense of responsibility of being the chief guard of the spirit guards, the sense of responsibility that appeared after becoming a master was much more delicate. In the past, Night Leaning Moon was someone who had never had a junior. But now that she had accepted Lu Jie as her disciple, Night Leaning Moon gained a junior out of thin air. Furthermore, it was his most direct descendant. Or it could be said that he was a descendant who had inherited his legacy. Previously, Night Leaning Moon felt that the Moon Empress was overly nice to her disciple. However, after becoming a master, Night Leaning Moon suddenly felt that the Moon Empress' actions back then were understandable. Didn't he take back the petals of the blue snow soul fragrance very naturally? Lu Jie felt like his brain couldn't process what was going on. Looking at the azure blue petals on the table and hearing the name Blue Snow Soul Fragrance, Lu Jie gave a simple and honest smile. This name undoubtedly touched the blind spot of Lu Jie's knowledge. Lu Jie had never heard of the Blue Snow Soul Fragrance, but something that could assist a sacred source life form in forming a contract had to be extraordinary. This was because Lu Jie could feel how precious these few petals of blue snow soul incense were from the gentle way his master was handling it. Master, then the first choice. Before Lu Jie could finish his sentence, Night Leaning Moon spoke as if it was a matter of course. When you weren't my disciple, I naturally gave you as many things as you deserved. But now that you've become my disciple, things are different. Night Leaning Moon stood up as she spoke. She picked up the sacred source life form from the white jade box on the table and handed it to Lu Jie. Forming a contract with a sacred source life form is very particular. You can't just use a blood contract. A blood contract with a sacred source life form forms a bloodline link between you and the sacred source life form. However, this bloodline link is not binding and is only equal. Sacred source life forms were born with high intelligence and had their own likes and dislikes. Therefore, using blood to form a bloodline contract of equal status was not the best choice. Lu Jie reached out his hand and smiled sheepishly as he scratched the back of his head. Lu Jie only knew about sacred source life forms, but he knew very little about sacred source life forms. For someone like Lu Jie who had never dared to dream of forming a contract with a sacred source life form, it was naturally impossible for him to know about it. Night Leaning Moon looked at Lu Jie's expression and picked up the petals of the blue snow soul orchid on the table. The best way to form a contract with a sacred source life form is to use the marrow in your bones to form a contract with the sacred source life form. This type of contract is called a marrow contract. A marrow contract can make a sacred source life form submit, but at the same time, your soul will also be resisted by the sacred source life form. Every sacred source life form contains a complete fragment of another world outside the dimensional hub, and it upholds a complete law. The function of this complete law is like the existence of truth. Even if an ordinary person's soul matures after the age of 20, they still cannot contend against a sacred source life form. However, with these petals from the creation breed blue snow soul fragrance, you can rest easy when forming a contract with a sacred source life form and use the marrow in your bones to form a blood contract with the sacred source life form. When forming a contract with a sacred source life form, you need to completely fuse the sacred source life form into your soul in order to force the sacred source life form to submit. This process will take a long time. However, with these 3 petals of the blue snow soul fragrance, you can complete the contract in a few hours. Night Leaning Moon's voice was as crisp as an oriole's. As she spoke, Night Leaning Moon explained to Lu Jie in an unusually serious manner. Even though Lu Jie did not ask any questions, the questions were posed through his facial expressions. After listening to Night Leaning Moon's explanation, Lu Jie immediately understood how to form a contract with a sacred source life form. At the same time, Lu Jie also understood how precious the blue snow soul fragrance was. The blue snow soul fragrance was a spiritual ingredient that came from a creation breed fae. Just the blue snow soul fragrance's ability to protect one's soul was enough to show how precious it was. The soul had always been the most mysterious existence. Spiritual ingredients that could protect the soul had always been the rarest of all spiritual ingredients. At the same time, it was also the most sought-after item by high-ranking spirit chi professionals. Now that he had Night Leaning Moon as his master, Lu Jie pondered for a moment before saying, "Thank you, master." "Thank you, master." After the battle in the dimensional rift, Lu Jie clearly felt that he was lacking in strength. The first time, end of this chapter. Chapter 5:33. Since Lin Yuan had restored a large amount of spiritual power in his body, the Insect Sea's combat power had been 3 times that of Lu Jie's own combat power. However, even if Lu Jie's strength had been increased by 3 times, he still could not stand out like a sword and cut through the thorns under Lin Yuan's feet at the critical moment. Once the Insect Queen's insects were exhausted, even if he wanted to fulfill his duty as a shield, he could only clumsily use his body as a shield. Lu Jie felt helpless and pained at his own incompetence. He was now ranked 30th in the Radiance 100 sequence, and the cocoon of evolution had parasitized the Insect Queen, which had greatly enhanced its abilities. However, as he watched Lin Yuan's continuous improvement, Lu Jie only felt the pressure in his heart increasing. Lu Jie knew that as long as Lin Yuan did not slow down, Lin Yuan would be able to surpass him. It would not take long for Lin Yuan to surpass him. At that time, the sword and shield that Lu Jie had turned into would become dull and frail in the face of his faith. Now that he had a master, he had a chance to rise and soar. This was definitely a good opportunity for Lu Jie, who had always been doubtful about himself. Night Leaning Moon needed to understand Lu Jie's information in advance before accepting a disciple, and Lu Jie also needed to think carefully. For someone like Lu Jie who valued relationships, once he called Night Leaning Moon his master would be his master for life. When Night Leaning Moon heard Lu Jie's thanks, she frowned slightly and said, "I'm your master." "I'm your master, why are you thanking me?" "Let's begin. I found this sacred source life form in the core of the Class 5 Swamp Dimensional Rift. I hope this sacred source life form's ability can complement your contracted Insect Queen." No one could know the sacred source life form's functions and effects before the contract was made. Even an absolute expert like Night Leaning Moon could not pry into the sacred source life form's original appearance under the rainbow light. It could be said that forming a contract with a sacred source life form was like opening a blind box. The items in the box had their own functions. However, they might not be compatible with the items that one already possessed. Night Leaning Moon said this because she was Lu Jie's master, and her words were like a blessing to Lu Jie. However, it did not matter if this sacred source life form was really useless to the Insect Queen. A contract with a sacred source life form was equivalent to giving Lu Jiexin an irrefutable method. A few hours later, an aura suddenly soared into the sky. All the experts in the spirit guards felt as if they had fallen into eternal darkness, a long night where all living things sank. In the blink of an eye, the terrifying pressure disappeared. Many spirit guards experts looked in the direction of the chief guard study. He secretly wondered what was wrong with the chief guard. Why did she suddenly release her aura? At this moment, Night Leaning Moon's crisp laughter, like that of an oriole, suddenly came from within the study. Night Leaning Moon was standing at the side of the table. The boundless spiritual energy from her hands formed a layer of spiritual energy cyclone, protecting the secret letters sent by the guard envoys on the table behind her. Lu Jie opened his eyes and looked at Night Leaning Moon apologetically as a layer of strange green light appeared over his body. "Teacher, I didn't know that sacred source life forms would automatically attack after completing the contract and fusing with the soul." Although Lu Jie was apologizing, his eyes were filled with disbelief and pleasant surprise. Night Leaning Moon's face was covered by a black veil, and her facial expression could not be seen. However, based on the curve of Night Leaning Moon's eyes, it was obvious that she was smiling. After the sacred source life form completes the marrow contract and submits to your soul, it will automatically launch an attack. This attack is called the sacred source first cry. It symbolizes the birth of a truth-like function. This first cry is the sacred source life form's way of proving its arrival to the world. Night Leaning Moon nodded with satisfaction. Just by looking at the attack of your contracted sacred source life form's first cry, I can confirm that you have contracted a sacred source life form that specializes in attacking. Not bad. You are indeed my disciple. You are in the same direction as me. Lu Jie now truly possessed a sacred source life form. After obtaining a sacred source life form, Lu Jie finally understood how powerful a sacred source life form was. Apart from the sacred source life form's own abilities, Lu Jie was even more delighted that his contracted sacred source life form and the insect queen's functions complemented each other. A flame of confidence ignited in Lu Jie's eyes. Lu Jie reached out and touched the Class 2 Creation Master retainer crest on his chest. It was missing a corner. He clenched the crest tighter in his palm. But at this time, Lu Jie was only using his own fingers. Lu Jie's palm gently wrapped around the damaged Class 2 Creation Master's retainer crest as though he was afraid of crushing it. Just as Lu Jie was about to show Night Leaning Moon his contracted sacred source life form, she interrupted him. Night Leaning Moon's expression was unusually serious and solemn. Never tell anyone about the sacred source life form's abilities, no matter who it is. Not even the people closest to you. After Night Leaning Moon finished her sentence, she saw that Lu Jie was listening attentively to her words. The Blade Queen Bee anomaly, I had already ordered someone to retrieve it before you arrived. However, the Blade Queen Bee's natal poison core can only be formed after it empties its insect eggs and devours a large number of Fays. That's why I wasted some time. Based on the time, the natal poison core should be formed by now. Lu Jie followed Night Leaning Moon's footsteps and walked out of the study. The Lu Jie who walked out of the study was completely different from the Lu Jie who had walked in. If Lu Jie had been a piece of silver before, he might still look like a piece of silver now, but the inside of the silver had been replaced with real gold. Once Lu Jie's contracted insect queen completed its evolution, the layer of silver on the surface of Lu Jie's body would be replaced with the same kind of real gold. After Lu Jie left the study, he realized that it had been windy when he arrived. However, the noon sun was high in the sky, and the bright sunlight shone on his body. It made his whole body feel warm and comfortable. Mystic Moon looked at the crispy golden spirit savory pig on the jade whalebone table, and could not help but mourn for 3 seconds in her heart. She wondered what had happened to the other 2 spirit savory pigs in the fragrant kitchen pavilion after she left. But at this moment, there were only 2 spirit savory pigs left in this world. Moreover, they were boars. It seemed that the Chef Supreme's postpartum care for sows would not be of any use in the future. Second update. Stay up late. End of this chapter. Chapter 5:34. The Moon Empress cut the ribs of the spirit savory pig into small pieces and sprinkled some plum sauce made from several types of diamond plums. Then, he handed the plate of spirit savory pork ribs to Lin Yuan and said, "That's right. These spirit savory pigs have been fed too much good stuff by Chef Venerable. They're a little fat now. Even if I use the top-notch flaming meteor quake flames from the Class 5-dimensional rift to roast it, it's still a little greasy. The plum jam made from the heart plum has a moderate amount of sweetness and sourness. It's very easy to get rid of the greasy taste, and it's not bad to eat with it." Earlier, Cold Moon felt that the Moon Empress was exaggerating to use the diamond smooth crystal silk jujube to grind into date cheese. At this moment, Mystic Moon felt that the Moon Empress was too exaggerated. The heart-containing plum was a type of medicine that could heal injuries to one's origin. A healing-type spirit chi professional might be able to heal all sorts of injuries, but it was a different story altogether. However, if a spirit chi professional's contracted Fey didn't have any special exclusive skills, it could only help the spirit chi professional, Fey, or source-type life forms recover from external injuries. An injury to the heart could no longer be considered an external injury. Instead, it could be considered as an injury to one's origin. A creation master would need to concoct a spirit fluid with spiritual ingredients to aid in the recovery. The plums produced by the plant type Fey, heart plum, were extremely effective in healing heart injuries. Not only were low-grade heart plums available in the Star Web's rare lifeform pavilion, but they could also be bought from large merchant associations. They were not considered precious items. However, the diamond heart plum was different. The heart plum was a fey that was extremely difficult to nurture. Most of the feys, including the spirit siphon goldfish that needed to absorb several times more spirit chi than normal feys, would be able to evolve normally after absorbing enough spirit chi. However, heart plum would be stuck in the process of reaching gold rank. Only after absorbing the tree cores of 10 heart plums of the same level as him would he be able to advance. In order to cultivate a high-grade heart plum, who knew how many low-grade heart plums he would need to use his own tree core as a sacrifice. In the hands of a creation master, the silver heart-containing plum would be able to heal injuries caused by violent concussions. In the hands of a creation master, the platinum heart plum could even repair the cracks in the walls of the heart. In the hands of a creation master, the diamond heart plum could even repair the shattered atrium and ventricles of the heart. It was considered a life-saving item. Another characteristic of the heart plum was that it tasted great. The heart-containing plum was a spirit material that could heal injuries to one's origin, and its taste was far superior to that of high-rank plums. Some rich and powerful families had the habit of eating heart plum fruits. They would even add dried heart plum fruits to their dishes as seasoning. However, even the most extravagant and wealthy families wouldn't easily consume heart plums that were above the gold rank. Mystic Moon understood that the Moon Empress was not an extravagant person. She was using diamond heart plums to make plum jam to nourish Lin Yuan's body. The heart was an organ used to pump blood. If Lin Yuan lost too much blood for a period of time, it would affect the heart's pumping function. However, Lin Yuan had already eaten half of the rabbit emperor's carrot. No matter how severe his injuries were, he would probably be full of energy now. The Leaning Moon Mountains orchard had 7 or 8 diamond heart-containing plum trees, and they would produce a batch of plums every year. However, Lin Yuan didn't need the diamond heart-containing plum trees to nourish his heart again. It could be said that every time Mystic Moon saw the Moon Empress interacting with Lin Yuan, he would have a new understanding of how a master doted on her disciple. As for using the meteor shaking flame to roast a whole pig, it wasn't considered a waste. Using the meteor shaking flame to roast meat wouldn't cause any damage, but in this world, only Lord Chef Supreme would use such a top-notch flame to roast meat every day. Only the Moon Empress could do it. The Moon Empress probably wanted to use the vibrations of the meteor shaking flame to shake the fat out of the spirit's savory pig. When Mystic Moon saw the Moon Empress handing Lin Yuan a plate of sliced pork ribs, he saw the cold moon also carefully shaving the spirit's savory pig's ribs. She cut off the most seasoned meat from the spirit's savory pig's ribs and placed them on the plate. Mystic Moon was a little curious. Didn't Cold Moon usually not eat meat? Why was she cutting the spirit's savory pig's ribs now? Mystic Moon saw Cold Moon cut off a piece of roasted golden and crispy pork skin after cutting the pork skin into thin shreds. After Cold Moon cut the pork skin into thin shreds, she put a spoonful of plum sauce on top of the crispy pork skin and boneless pork slices. This allowed the sweet and sour plum, the crispy pork skin, and the fragrant and soft pork to perfectly blend together. It had 2 completely different textures, and paired with the sweet and sour taste, it could be said to be the best way to eat the spirit's savory pig. Mystic Moon couldn't help but lament that people changed. Cold Moon usually didn't eat meat, but now, she seemed to have become a gourmet. Just as Mystic Moon was lamenting, he saw that Cold Moon was just like the Moon Empress. However, Cold Moon didn't place the plate in front of Lin Yuan but in front of Chu Ci. Immediately after, Mystic Moon realized that Cold Moon was looking at her with eyes full of flaunting. It was as if she was saying, "Hee hee, you're so useless. You've lived for so long but you can't even get a disciple." Mystic Moon felt that the spirit's savory pig in her mouth didn't taste good anymore. The pair of master and disciple and the pair of brother and sister seemed to be constantly showing off their cat food. On the other hand, he had become a trembling meow that could only choose to eat cat food. Mystic Moon couldn't help but think of accepting a disciple. As Lin Yuan ate the pork ribs that the Moon Empress had cut for him, he felt the Moon Empress care for him. Lin Yuan also asked about the sacred source life form in the depths of his soul. When the Moon Empress had mentioned the sacred source life form to Lin Yuan, she had told him not to tell anyone about his sacred source life form's abilities. Lin Yuan didn't want to ask about his contracted sacred source lifeform's abilities. This was because he still didn't know what abilities his contracted sacred source lifeform had. Master, is it possible for sacred source lifeforms to fuse? The Moon Empress was stunned by Lin Yuan's question, but she quickly replied, some people's souls are strong enough to contract two sacred source lifeforms. Some people's souls are strong enough to form a contract with two sacred source lifeforms, but I've never heard of anyone fusing sacred source lifeforms. The Moon Empress didn't know why Lin Yuan was asking this question, but she knew that Lin Yuan had already contracted a sacred source lifeform in the dimensional rift. Therefore, now that Lin Yuan was asking about sacred source lifeforms, the Moon Empress was especially attentive. First, end of this chapter. Chapter 5:35. After listening to Lin Yuan's words, the Moon Empress knew that she needed to explain more about sacred source lifeforms. After listening to Lin Yuan's words, the Moon Empress knew that she needed to explain more about sacred source lifeforms. The Moon Empress could not help but wonder if her disciple had formed a contract with a sacred source lifeform. He wanted to find another sacred source lifeform and fuse it with another sacred source lifeform. He wanted to fuse two completely different sacred source lifeforms into a new sacred source lifeform. What kind of strange idea was that? When Mystic Moon heard Lin Yuan's words, she nearly choked on the roasted meat in her mouth. Mystic Moon admired Lin Yuan's imagination. What kind of imagination did he have to come up with such a high-class method? If it was really possible, wouldn't the sacred source lifeform be able to continuously absorb new sacred source lifeforms to increase its functionality? The Moon Empress saw that Lin Yuan was almost done with the meat on his plate. She picked up a small, white bowl and prepared to serve Lin Yuan a bowl of jujube cheese as dessert. The Moon Empress doted on Lin Yuan, but it was not because she had given him a mysterious lifestyle. The Moon Empress was worried about Lin Yuan's health because she had been frightened when Lin Yuan had come out of the dimensional rift. This shock wasn't because the Moon Empress saw Lin Yuan's hands, which were almost devoid of flesh and bones. Instead, it was because Lin Yuan had formed a marrow contract with a sacred source lifeform before the age of 20, allowing the sacred source lifeform to submit to him and fuse with his soul. This was also why the Moon Empress had broken the little rabbit's carrot without hesitation and not given it to Lin Yuan. Now, the Moon Empress was glad that Lin Yuan had formed a marrow contract with the sacred source lifeform. A spirit chi professional forming a contract with a sacred source lifeform was considered an extremely important matter in one's life. There was no way to renege or start over. If Lin Yuan had only used a blood contract when forming a contract with the sacred source lifeform, it was very likely that when he used the sacred source lifeform in the future, he would not be able to form a contract with the sacred source lifeform as easily as he could with a marrow contract. At Lin Yuan's current age and strength, the difference between forming a blood contract and a marrow contract with a sacred source lifeform was not obvious. However, when Lin Yuan became a top-notch expert, the difference between a blood contract and a marrow contract would be infinitely greater. Therefore, in the Moon Empress' opinion, this kind of coincidence was more of a blessing and luck for Lin Yuan than forming a contract with a sacred source lifeform. Lin Yuan heard the Moon Empress answer. He knew that his contracted sacred source lifeform's fusion phenomenon was unusual. Even an expert like the Moon Empress had never heard of such a situation. After Lin Yuan woke up, he realized that there really was a young girl with closed eyes, a crown on her head, and a sharp sword in her arms in the depths of his soul. He knew that the dream he had when he was unconscious was actually what really happened in the depths of his soul. Lin Yuan recalled the familiar reddish-gold radiance that enveloped the depths of his soul. This reddish-gold radiance was the color of the Morbius bracelet. Lin Yuan was not a fool. When Lin Yuan woke up and realized that Morbius was asleep, he was sure that the reddish-gold light that had enveloped his soul and allowed the two sacred source lifeforms to fuse had come from Morbius. Ever since he had formed a contract with Morbius, he had sensed that it was not as simple as an ordinary Fae. Before Lin Yuan had come into contact with a source-type item, he had only treated Morbius as a source-type item. After coming into contact with a source-type item, Lin Yuan felt that Morbius' ability was not something that a source-type item could compare to. Not long after, Lin Yuan found out about the existence of a sacred source life form. Lin Yuan could not help but wonder if Morbius, which had been born with him, was a sacred source life form. However, when he thought of the two rebellious sacred source life forms in the depths of his soul, they instinctively felt fear when they saw the reddish-gold light that had enveloped his soul. Lin Yuan could not help but boldly guess if Morbius was an existence of a higher level than a sacred source life form. Lin Yuan did not continue to tell the Moon Empress about the fusion of the sacred source life forms in the depths of his soul. Since his master had never heard of it, he would only worry her. If he told her, it would only make her worry. In short, the fusion of two sacred source life forms would not be too weak. After asking about the sacred source life forms, Lin Yuan raised his head, put down the spoon in his hand, and spoke to the Moon Empress in a very serious tone. Master, I heard a person called Hunting Ashes mention Lord Seventh Page War in the Dimensional Rift. After hearing Lin Yuan's question, the Moon Empress, who had been helping Lin Yuan with the jujube cheese with a smile on her face, immediately turned serious. Cold Moon's expression suddenly turned cold. Black Moon's beautiful eyes, which had a silver sheen, immediately narrowed. The Moon Empress' expression only turned serious for a moment before she returned to her original smile. She placed the jujube cheese on the table in front of Lin Yuan and said, "Drink some of this jujube cheese. Drink some of this jujube. This jujube is very good for replenishing blood. You can also try to see if the master's cooking has improved." Lin Yuan saw the expressions of his master, Cold Moon and Black Moon. He knew that they already knew what he wanted to express and which faction the name, Seventh Page War, belonged to. When his master, the Moon Empress, knew the other party's name and faction, she immediately changed the topic. This meant that his master did not want him to understand too much about this matter. Lin Yuan also did not want to participate in this matter. Lin Yuan had used all his strength and even his life to stop the dimensional rift's evolution. He had already done what he had to do according to his heart and will. Lin Yuan understood that although his strength had been improving, he was still a little too weak in the face of such a matter. Only an expert like his master, the Moon Empress, could shoulder such a responsibility. Lin Yuan lowered his head to drink the jujube cheese in the bowl and found that it was surprisingly not sweet. However, the mellow jujube fragrance seemed to bring Lin Yuan to the depths of the jujube flowers. At that moment, the Moon Empress raised her hand, and a rainbow ball of light appeared in her palm. "This is your personal reward from the spirit guards for stopping the dimensional rift's evolution. You have already contracted a sacred source life form. Even if you want to try to contract a second or two sacred source life forms, your soul will need at least 3 years to recover. Also, I have already prepared your sacred source life form for you, so you can decide what to do with it." As she spoke, the Moon Empress had already handed the sacred source life form to Lin Yuan. "It's too difficult for me. I get criticized for writing about battles and daily life. I write about the familiars but don't introduce the strange phase and things inside. I might as well write a traditional fantasy novel and not write a niche novel. I have always loved to read transformation novels and the summoning and beast-taming novels. Writing novels is also a hobby. Because Book Desolation wanted to write a novel, he had been writing until now. I will read everyone's suggestions carefully. But for those who don't like it, please don't scold me. Thank you. Please, 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 I am really serious about writing. Also, please get monthly votes and recommendation votes. I will set up a flag and return the updates tomorrow." End of this chapter. Chapter 5:36. After Lin Yuan held the sacred source life form in his hand, the Moon Empress spoke to Lin Yuan in a serious tone. "In 3 years, if you want to try to contract a sacred source life form with your soul, you must be by my side. I will protect you." As the Moon Empress spoke, she could not help but think about the time when Lin Yuan had been spat out by the dimensional rift. The extent to which his soul had been shattered by the sacred source life form's impact. The Moon Empress had insisted that Lin Yuan be by her side the next time he tried to contract a sacred source life form. It was not that only by protecting Lin Yuan would he be able to increase his chances of contracting a second sacred source life form. The soul was not like a talent. Even those with poor talent, as long as they worked hard enough, they could achieve the same results as those with high talent through hard work. However, the gap between souls was already determined from birth. It was a chasm that could not be crossed. Even the rarest spiritual ingredient could only protect the contractor's soul from the sacred source lifeform's impact when a spirit chi professional tried to contract a second sacred source lifeform. It could not increase the chances of contracting a second sacred source lifeform. The Moon Empress had said this because she did not want Lin Yuan to experience a second time when his soul was on the brink of shattering. Upon hearing the Moon Empress' caring words, Lin Yuan smiled brightly, revealing his white teeth. He spoke as though he was making a promise. "Don't worry, Master. When I try to contract a second sacred source lifeform, I will definitely be by your side." When the Moon Empress heard Lin Yuan's childish smile and guaranteed tone, she was slightly startled. Then, she smiled from the bottom of her heart. The Moon Empress had always felt that Lin Yuan was a little mature. Even though Lin Yuan looked like an 18-year-old handsome youth, be it the way he spoke or the way he did things, it was more like a seasoned adult. The Moon Empress had always felt a little melancholic about this. If Lin Yuan was someone else's disciple, the Moon Empress might admire his way of speaking and doing things. However, Lin Yuan was her disciple. When it came to her disciple, the Moon Empress hoped that Lin Yuan would not put so many burdens on her shoulders. As Lin Yuan's master, the Moon Empress hoped that Lin Yuan would be like an 18-year-old youth and live a carefree life. Now that Lin Yuan had inadvertently revealed his youthful side, the Moon Empress could not help but feel that it was very beautiful. Lin Yuan stored the sacred source life form in the amber button-shaped diamond fey storage box and drank the jujube cheese that had the pure aroma of jujube flowers. Lin Yuan could not help but think about how he should use this sacred source life form. He raised his head and looked at Chu Si, who was sitting on the table and filling a bowl with jujubes for Cold Moon. Lin Yuan watched as she scooped the jujube cheese and suddenly reflected on himself. It could be said that as the Moon Empress disciple, he had always been receiving meticulous care from his master. He had also taken a lot of good things from the Radiant Moon Palace before, but every time he brought good things to the Radiant Moon Palace, the Radiant Moon Palace wouldn't accept it. The Moon Empress would always say, "Why did you take things when you came to your own home? Master has everything here." Then she would ask him to take it back. Gradually, Lin Yuan stopped taking things from the Radiant Moon Palace. But now, Lin Yuan felt that he had been thinking about something wrong. He had not expected to be taught a lesson by his younger sister. He had never done something as heartwarming as Chu Si filling a bowl of jujubes for Cold Moon for his master, the Moon Empress. Just as Lin Yuan was looking at Chu Si, Cold Moon, who was next to her, looked at Lin Yuan with a strange expression. Cold Moon hesitated for a few seconds before saying, "Your Highness, Chu Si still has a few more days. She will only be 16 after the new year, and there is still a long way to go before she turns 20. There is no hurry to contract a sacred source life form. When the time comes as her master, I will also prepare a sacred source life form for Chu Si." When Lin Yuan heard Cold Moon's words, he felt that Cold Moon was a little like a lioness protecting her cubs on the prairie. Although Cold Moon did not say it explicitly, Lin Yuan could see her expression and tone. He could feel Cold Moon's possessiveness toward Chu Si. Lin Yuan smiled awkwardly. He could not help but feel that after Chu Si had a master, it was a little difficult for him, as her brother, to give her anything. However, from Cold Moon's words, Lin Yuan could feel that she cared about Chu Si. "Aunt Cold Moon, I will have to trouble you in the future." When Cold Moon heard Lin Yuan's words, the coldness that had covered her face when she heard the words, "Seventh Page War," immediately melted. Her usually expressionless face revealed a rare smile. "Lin Yuan, don't worry." This time, Cold Moon did not call Lin Yuan Young Lord. Instead, she called him by his name. Therefore, Cold Moon did not treat Lin Yuan as the young lord of the Radiant Moon Palace. She only treated him as her disciple Chu Si's brother. Cold Moon's "don't worry" was in response to Lin Yuan's request as Chu Si's brother. Lin Yuan was not only happy that Chu Si could become Cold Moon's disciple, but he also felt at ease. Just like when he had been ambushed by Cheng Wu in the royal capital's suburbs and his life had been hanging by a thread. Lin Yuan had subconsciously thought about what Chu Si would do if he really died. However, now that Chu Si had Cold Moon as her master, Lin Yuan did not need to worry about Chu Si's safety and life even if his life was hanging by a thread. Lin Yuan had looked at Chu Si previously because the first person he had thought of after obtaining another sacred source life form was his younger sister. However, Lin Yuan had never thought of letting Chu Si contract a sacred source life form before she turned 20. His master, the Moon Empress, had mentioned many times that spirit chi professionals had to wait until their souls had matured before they could contract a sacred source life form. There must be a reason for this. This meant that contracting a sacred source life form before a spirit chi professional's soul matured at the age of 20 would be extremely harmful to the spirit chi professional's soul. Lin Yuan had Morbius, which had allowed him to survive through the reddish-gold light that enveloped the depths of his soul. However, Morbius was an existence that only he had. Lin Yuan was certain that Chu Si had always been pure and clean since she was born. She did not have a companion fae like Morbius. Since Lin Yuan did not need to care about Chu Si, he made a choice about the sacred source life form. Among the people in his faction, he felt that the most suitable candidates were Lu Jie and the Mother of Bloodbath. However, compared to the Mother of Bloodbath, Lin Yuan was more inclined to let Lu Jie contract this sacred source life form. The first choice was even better. End of this chapter. Chapter 537. Lu Jie was now 25 years old and had reached the age where he could contract a sacred source life form. He did not know how long it would take for the Mother of Bloodbath to become a creation breed. Lin Yuan did not know how much stronger the Mother of Bloodbath's suzerain/myth 2 strength would be after eating a bunch of blood brew grapes from the blood brew grapevine. Even if he allowed Red Thorn to use its full strength to absorb flesh energy and form the Eye of Relinquish, the Mother of Bloodbath would not be able to do so. The Eye of Relinquish would nurture the blood brew grapevine so that it could grow blood brew grapes as quickly as possible. However, even a hard-working farmer like him was afraid of encountering a true glutton. Therefore, compared to the Mother of Bloodbath, who did not know when it would become a creation breed, Lin Yuan was much stronger. Letting Lu Jie contract this sacred source life form was undoubtedly the best choice. As for Zhou Luo, who had gone through life and death with him in the dimensional rift, Lin Yuan did not intend to give him a sacred source life form. However, Lin Yuan no longer regarded Zhou Luo as a white-clothed follower under his sky city. He treated Zhou Luo as one of his own. Lin Yuan's principle for nurturing white-clothed servants was to use high-quality bronze fays in exchange for their loyalty. As for the resources to nurture high-grade fays after the white-clothed servants' loyalty, the white-clothed servants would have to earn it themselves. However, Lin Yuan intended to pour in a lot of his resources for Zhou Luo. He wanted to quickly upgrade Zhou Luo's Lava Dragon Lizard and the Bronze/Epic Dark Snake Dragon Lizard that he had just contracted and had yet to nurture. As for the Bronze/Epic Dark Snake Dragon Lizard, Lin Yuan planned to upgrade it from Epic to Legend at Bronze before Zhou Luo nurtured it to Silver. In the beginning, Zhou Luo had sworn an allegiance oath to Lin Yuan as a white-clothed servant and was considered a servant of Sky City. However, after experiencing a life-and-death situation and Zhou Luo's willingness to step forward, Lin Yuan had completely acknowledged Zhou Luo. Although there had been many twists and turns on his return from Indigo Azure City, he had also gained a lot. Not to mention the gains from the Indigo Azure Sea market, just the fact that he had contracted a sacred source life form was enough for Lin Yuan to not have experienced this storm in vain. It was almost the new year, and after that, it would be the S Tournament final season. During the season of the S Tournament, before the finals of the S Tournament, there was also a high-profile battle for the Radiance 100 sequence. He planned to run his faction in the royal capital during the period before the Radiance 100 sequence competition. After he had his exclusive territory on Star Web, he had yet to exercise those 3 rights. Announce the management functions of your private faction to other factions with private territories on Star Web. He planned to take advantage of the new year to manage his star web private territory and spread his sense of superiority as a private faction. Lin Yuan wanted to go back to his old trade and be a cute merchant, that people would come and ask him if he had good goods. After the meal, the two of them started to learn from their respective masters. During the question and answer session with the Moon Empress, Lin Yuan asked all the questions he had encountered during this period of time. Of course, most of the problems Lin Yuan raised were related to sacred source life forms. Although Lin Yuan now possessed a sacred source life form, he was still clueless about its concept. From the Moon Empress answers, Lin Yuan learned that sacred source life forms were divided into blood and marrow contracts. When Lin Yuan thought about the injuries he had sustained when grabbing the sacred source life form, he knew that he must have formed a marrow contract with two sacred source life forms at the same time. After listening to the Moon Empress explanation about the risks of forming a marrow contract, Lin Yuan could not help but feel a lingering fear. At the same time, he was even more curious about what kind of existence Morbius, which had accompanied him, was. It was actually able to protect his soul, which was about to shatter, in such a dangerous situation. After the question and answer session, Lin Yuan could be said to have a basic understanding of sacred source life forms. When Lin Yuan asked questions, the Moon Empress realized that many of his questions could directly touch on the essence of things. Just through this question and answer session, the Moon Empress could feel Lin Yuan's rapid improvement during this period of time. When answering Lin Yuan's questions, the Moon Empress was a little stunned. It seemed that she had only accepted Lin Yuan as a disciple for half a year. However, Lin Yuan's growth speed in this half a year was equivalent to at least 5 years of hard work by other geniuses. Moreover, the Moon Empress was clear in her heart that her disciple, Lin Yuan, must be hiding some tricks that he usually did not use. At the very least, Lin Yuan's identity as a healing-type spirit chi professional was completely genuine. Otherwise, when Lu Jie had been spat out by the dimensional rift and had fallen into a coma, his body would not have overflowed with such dense vitality. Lin Yuan had not yet become an A-rank spirit chi professional and could not circulate the spiritual power in his body to form a spirit chi cyclone. Without a protective spirit chi cyclone, what kind of healing ability did Lin Yuan have to be able to take out the sacred source life forms from the evolving dimensional rift? It had to be known that in order to take out the sacred source life forms and source-type life forms from the dimensional hub's spatial energy fluctuations, one could only rely on physical strength to resist. If one used a Fey to carry out an energy attack, the energy attack would be directly transmitted through the dimensional hub to the world on the other side of the dimensional hub. Not only did the Moon Empress not feel bad about Lin Yuan's behavior of hiding his strength, but she also abnormally admired it. The Moon Empress could not help but sigh in her heart. As expected of my disciple. Just like me, he likes to hide his strength. The question and answer session lasted for the entire afternoon. After the question and answer session, everyone knew that Mystic Moon, who did not have a disciple, had prepared a sumptuous dinner. After dinner, the sun gradually set in the west. However, the halo of dusk was unusually gentle, elongating the shadows of Lin Yuan and Chu Si, who were strolling on the Leaning Moon Mountain. Lin Yuan was holding the dried fruits that he had picked on the Leaning Moon Mountain for Chu Si. The plants on the Leaning Moon Mountain were extremely lush, and the little fays that lived on the mountain could not finish eating the dried fruits that fell from the trees. Lin Yuan broke open a pine nut that was half the size of a palm and handed it to Chu Si. This fresh dried fruit has not been roasted. Although the fragrance is a little weaker, the fresh taste is even stronger. But really, is it okay for you to eat so many dried fruits just after dinner? Chu Si looked at the pine nut that was half the size of a palm and bounced with a smile. Lin Yuan, dried fruits don't take up any space in my stomach, do they? Although Chu Si said that, she used her other hand to rub her belly with satisfaction while eating the pine nut. The Leaning Moon Mountain was like spring all year round. The young lady's left shoulder was leaning against the youth beside her, and her right shoulder was reflecting the setting sun and the green grass. Every lively expression was like a beautiful oil painting that fused the feelings of a brother and sister. The young girl hopped like a fawn and took a step forward. She handed over the half-eaten pine nuts to Lin Yuan and said, "That's right. Big brother, I can't eat anymore." The youth turned around and glanced at the young lady's face. He helplessly stretched out his hand and gently stroked the corner of the young lady's mouth, wiping off a piece of pine nut crumb. Lin Yuan glanced at the pine nut in his hand, which was not even as big as the corner of Chu Si's mouth, and said helplessly and dotingly, "I think I can't eat anymore. Even a blackback mountain boar can't eat as much as you." The second one was even more delicious. I love you guys so much. Please get recommendation votes and monthly votes. End of this chapter. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.